Okay, I need a confession from you two.
The band or us?
The band is great, by the way. I was just thinking the other day about seeing him at the Sphere, and it was one of the great nights of the last several years for me. No, from you two, we'll begin with this question. I need a show of hands from Jimmy Cook and Eddie Garrison here. If you have a sunroof on your car, raise your hand. You don't have one, Jimmy? I thought for sure you did.
Used to. Do not anymore.
Okay. So neither of you have a sunroof. Let me ask you this. If you cracked your windows at any point in the last 24 hours while driving, raise your hand. Eddie Garrison with the hand up. I knew it.
Did it yesterday, did it today.
It's spring fever, baby. Like, when is Selection Sunday? Is that coming up at 6 at, like, later today? Are they going to announce the pairings for the tournament? That's what it feels like. I realize this is not going to last forever. And we're going to get another dose of reality at some point, inevitably, especially just before the high school basketball tournament starts. There's always a flurry of snow that happens. But 40 and sunny, let's go, right?
Beautiful.
It was 42 when I got into the building today at like 9:45. I was like, what in the world?
What in the world were you doing here at 9:45 is a better question.
I had a new edition of Colts Corner with Kevin Bowen. We recorded earlier today.
The band new edition was here?
No.
Mr. Telephone Man?
No.
Okay. So that recorded Colts Corner, you said?
Yes, sir.
I thought it was Kevin's Corner. Did they change the name?
Yeah, we rebranded to Colts Corner.
I thought it was from Colts Corner to Kevin's Corner.
No. Kevin's Corner to Colts Corner.
Okay. So the Colts have a monopoly on the corner. So it's basically like the corner itself. It's not go straight to jail. It's Waterworks or one of those corners, right?
Yeah.
It's a monopoly on the Colts.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Good afternoon to you on a Wednesday that for some reason I feel like is a Thursday. I don't know why all day. You ever had that happen when you wake up and you just have it in your brain that it's a different day of the week?
Yes.
Sometimes it works to your advantage because you're like, oh, today's Tuesday. And then like, oh, no, it's Wednesday. We're a step ahead. For some reason, I've been thinking Thursday all day.
So you're on the wrong side of it then.
I am. I'm on the wrong side
sorry.
of it. But tonight, Pacers in action taking on the Detroit Pistons at the Fieldhouse. That's a 7 o'clock tip. It is their first game back after their trip to Paris. And are we starting to see now, this team clearly is coming together. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Obviously, the disappointment, we've talked plenty about it, when they first got to Paris. But it feels like if you drive outside right now, if you go outside right now and you think about the last couple of weeks, the big snowfall, the gray skies, the crunchy snow, the sub-zero temperatures, all of those things, it feels in the last 2 days like we've made our way out of it, like it's broken through, we've made it, congratulations. Again, I know we can't get too optimistic here, but from a temperature standpoint, it feels like we've made it through the tunnel. Likewise, it kind of feels for the Pacers when you look at the way that they've played, that now that they are together and healthy, and now that you have Nesmith making his return, you have obviously Andrew Nembhard, who is back in regular rotation. Matherin has kind of figured out where his role is. Yes, you'd love to have Isaiah Jackson and James Wiseman, who were gone at the beginning of the year. But would you agree, Jimmy, that it feels like when you look at the Pacers sitting at 25-20, sitting right now in, I'll say fifth in the East, but essentially right there with Milwaukee, a game back for fourth, five games out of third, it does feel like they themselves have weathered the storm here and assuming, and hold on, let's see if we can do this. That's me knocking on wood. Assuming that they stay healthy, that they've made it out of the dark period now and things start to feel like you can crack the window a little bit.
I would agree with that. I mean, their road record especially, and granted it was heavy with road games out of the gate to start the year, but their road record was putrid to start the season. And we were looking at those splits between home and road and thinking that they looked more like the Washington Wizards or the Toronto Raptors away from Gainbridge Fieldhouse than they did the Pacers team that we expected to see. They got reinforcements. They've gotten healthier. They've turned a corner. They're to the point where ESPN didn't count this as a road game, but I believe it is a road game by itself. Eddie, the Paris games did count as home and road splits, correct? Or did they just say, hey, neutral site?
I'm
Let's
not
move on.
sure if they counted towards home and road record, but it was a home game. One game was
Sure.
a home game for the Pacers. The other was for the Spurs, but I don't think it went towards the record.
Either way, they're 500 now on the road. They are in a comfortable spot in the middle of the pecking order within the Eastern Conference. A team behind them right now in the Miami Heat is of no threat because they're either going to totally have this thing cascade with Jimmy Butler, which you could argue it already has, or they're going to ship him off, at which point that likely shifts them out of the conversation within the Eastern Conference playoff picture. So, yeah, there's a lot of reason for confidence, but I would also say both Pacers and Pacers fans should dial it in over these next couple weeks because you have 8 games left before the All-Star break. You're 8 days away as well from the trade deadline, and as much more foundational footing you can gather yourself for that home stretch once we get back from All-Star coverage in San Francisco on February 20th. At that point, it's a dead sprint to the finish line to April, and you want to have yourself as comfortable of a cushion to be able to ease things back in. Maybe you make a trade deadline acquisition, ease whoever that player is in, so that by the time we get to meaningful basketball, they are at the close to full strength minus Jackson and Wiseman as we hope they would be going into the season. So, yeah, a lot of reason for optimism, but Jake, would you agree on that front that it feels like a pivotal stretch because of how many of these final 8 before the All-Star break wind up being away from home, and to show them that Paris trip wasn't a mistake, there's no rust when they come back.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing, right? You want to maintain. The one thing about the Paris trip that I'm not going to say is of concern, but is of a little bit of that I'm curious to see is, they were playing really well going into that, and did that, and obviously they played well in the backside of that trip, but was that a little bit of a speed bump when they were kind of cruising along there, right? And everything was going perfect. It's kind of like, and I'm going to use a bad analogy that it's probably dumb of me because I'm going from talking about the NBA, which is mainstream, to auto racing, which is esoteric. But thank you. That's the brilliant analogy sounder, as we know.
That thing is way too long.
It is just horrific from Fish, right? A guy's playing a vacuum cleaner, and people think it's great. So if you are in the Indy 500 and you are out front, or your car is just perfect and you're just cruising, you look at a guy and you go, man, this guy's laying down great laps, and you talk to him afterwards, car feels great. You don't want a caution flag, right? You don't want all of a sudden to have to stop and everybody kind of groups up, and now your car's going from running 225, 230 and being very comfortable. You scale it down to doing 170. Now you needed to go back up to 220, and the car's like, what happened? And the car just never responds again. You kind of wonder, I'm curious if that's the kind of thing that we might see here, where they were cruising along. You just want to stay that way and not have the sudden interruption. The Paris trip was cool, don't get me wrong. But yes, I'm curious to see what happens. Now, in terms of, and we're going to talk trade deadline coming up, Evan Sidery from Forbes is going to join us about 20 minutes from now. The Jimmy Butler thing, is this relevant? Like, Jimmy Butler's a great player. He is a flat-out winner, like, get the hell out of the guy. One of my Jake Queryisms, a get the hell out of the way guy. What is that? Well, that's a guy that, like, says, give me the ball, and everybody else just get the hell out of the way, right? So he has always been that guy in his career and just has a bulldog-type mentality about himself. But he also is cantankerous, and there's always seemingly some drama. At first you said, hey, I like the fact that Jimmy Butler, like, this guy just challenges people, right? He says to his teammates, listen, I'll take on anybody here. I'm trying to bring a culture here. And I think he did that to an extent in Miami as well. But he's kind of a Randy Johnson type where he's seemingly never going to be completely satisfied. But at this point in his career, combined with his age and just the lack of games he's played, is he worth, Jimmy, the headache or the risk for anybody that's going to take him on?
No, and it's a rinse and repeat cycle for Jimmy Butler. He does this everywhere he goes, and don't be wrong, he's still a talented player even at age 35, but he gets somewhere, he starts to grow, he starts to shine, he sees his deal is running up on his contract, he demands to be paid. Team doesn't pay him, they ship him off somewhere, that team pays him, he starts to shine, he starts to grow, his contract's about to end, he wants to be paid, That team won't pay him. He gets traded, rinse and repeat. And that's what's happening again here in Miami. But unfortunately for him, he's reached a point where the juice isn't worth the squeeze anymore. He's 35 years old. He is not the best player on a championship team anymore at this stage of his career. And any of the teams that would look at him and say, well, you could be our second or third best team mate on this roster, don't have the money to pay for him. So no, he's not worth the headache. And it's fascinating to see from afar because I don't know how the rest of the town or Jake, you yourself feel. I've always admired Pat Riley over decades, his ability to cultivate rosters and get the most out of his teams. And that phrase heat culture got overused to a point of like, oh, they do everything perfect in Miami until you throw in a wild card like Jimmy Butler and all of a sudden the culture's out the window because you have your team held hostage by a player that's going to be still owed $52 million with a player option next year. They're trapped. And it's fascinating, and that's what makes it interesting to me because it's a team that was built on culture and we do things better than everybody else and our players don't act this way. And then you get a wild card in your roster that, granted, took you to 2 NBA finals and took you in ways where people thought, Miami's an 8 seed or 7 seed. They're not going to go there. Like, he was valuable to the franchise at the time, but now he's caused this train wreck in the middle of the Eastern Conference against a prestigious franchise that I can't help but be fascinated by watching. I don't know if it matters locally. The only angle there is they're so close, Jake, to the Pacers in the standings still right now that it makes for something to keep an eye on.
Let me tell you a Jake Query brain dropping that happened to me. This was last night, about 12:30. Not as late, right? So maybe not as deep in thought.
It's the first cup.
So I was thinking about NBA franchises. And then I was thinking about what band they are. What band is each NBA franchise in terms of the totality of the franchise?
This is 2 a.m. query material, by the way, at 12:30.
The Miami Heat. Do you want to know what band I decided is the Miami Heat?
Eddie's going to be your better guesser for this game, so if you want to play that, I'd go to him.
Oh, man, I'm not sure.
Okay, I'll give you an example. The Chicago Bulls are the Beatles. Now, the Beatles are the greatest band of all time, and the Bulls are not the greatest franchise of all time. Don't get me wrong. But the Bulls had the greatest player, or certainly debatable as the greatest player, right? And they had a 1-2 combo that was really, really good for a 7 or 8 year stretch there, right? The Beatles were an 8-year band, 7.5-year band with probably the greatest songwriter of all time, and then a 1-2 combo and then you look at it after the time and you go, the other two were pretty darn good too, right? So the Bulls would be the Beatles.
And then you look at them currently and somebody doesn't know about Hey Jude, and he's like, I don't get what those Bulls were. What are we doing here?
There's an element of truth to that, right? The Miami Heat is Genesis. Genesis is a great band and had 2 different stretches and periods where they were amongst the very best. And in those 2 different periods had 2 different lead singers. At one time, you talk to some people in Genesis, they're like, oh, yeah, the Peter Gabriel Genesis. A la, the Dwayne Wade Heat, right? Then it's like, no. The Phil Collins Genesis. Well, that would be the LeBron James Heat, right? Like two different eras, okay? Not eras, but you get what I'm saying. So the Miami Heat, Genesis. Now, the Boston Celtics. The Boston Celtics, to me, would be...
Boston be 2 on the nose? I'm just being funny.
Boston's not bad, actually, but the Celtics are the longest... I think the Boston Celtics are the Rolling Stones.
So who is... I don't mean to... Because I want to get the elaboration on that, too, but do you have an equal, then, rival out west for the Lakers?
So the Lakers would be... And this is challenging because the Lakers would be right there. The Lakers probably... And this is the hard part because Led Zeppelin was not around long enough, but Led Zeppelin had more. Actually, the Lakers may be the Rolling Stones because they have flair and they've been around forever. But they've been stable in terms of their lineup. That's the challenge there, right? So the Lakers are kind of hard because certainly the Rolling Stones would be have more longevity. I'll go with this. I'll say the Boston Celtics are Aerosmith because Aerosmith is from Boston and they've been around forever, right? And then I would put the Rolling Stones as the Lakers because they are equally great in terms of their length, but they have a little more like style to them.
Sure.
The Celtics don't seem to have that same style. So who are the Pacers?
Yeah.
That's my question for you. Who are the Pacers? I have my thought on who the Pacers would be.
So I'll describe the band, and then maybe Eddie can assist me here. I would think of them as a group that every 5 or 10 years puts out this great album that's like
Fair.
maybe second best of the year. Like there's always one like, oh man, they were great, but what about these guys? That's probably where I would, but it's escaping me who to label them as. That's be my archetype though of band.
This band is bigger, don't get me wrong, but if you went with Guns N' Roses, peak years, like the years are a little off, but had a peak year run, right? That with one album that like catapulted and put them into the mainstream, and they were right there for a 3 to 4 year stretch, then came back with another double album that was great, different, kind of a different sound, right?
Yeah.
But kept them in the mainstream. And then now is back in touring again and selling out arenas. The problem, and very good again, the problem is Guns N' Roses had a long period of dormancy there, and the Pacers really have not, is the challenge there, right?
I mean, I guess post-Brawl.
Yeah, that's...
Once Reggie hung it up, you had the lull a bit to get back to once Granger arrived, and then Paul George and Roy Hibbert and David West.
Halen?
Van Halen. You're saying the Pacers are Van Halen?
Yeah.
Okay, Van Halen could also be the Heat, right? Because you got the two different lead singer aspect of it.
Yep.
You almost need a third there with Shaq.
Yeah. The Pacers, I do feel, and this is no disrespect to the Pacers, but I feel like Van Halen and Guns N' Roses in the music lore are considered in a higher class than most NBA people would consider the Pacers to be, right? So it'd have to be a band like who's a band that everyone knows and everyone likes them, but they're not considered, but they're more like on the national scale of things. I mean, are the Pacers Hootie and the Blowfish?
Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers?
Yeah, but he was around for a long time, though, right?
They've been around for a long time.
Well, true, but I mean...
I just Googled for the sake of it, just to fit my profile, bands that always got snubbed by the Grammys.
Rush?
Okay.
And the answer that ChatGPT or whatever Google AI gave me, Def Leppard is a band that has never been nominated for or won a Grammy.
That's not bad. That's not bad.
And I'm
Rush?
making Grammys as NBA Finals. That's good.
I can't go with Rush, though, because the guy's voice just bothers me.
Tears for Fears? These are coming from the break room.
Tears for Fears, not bad, but again, just one era and kind of a short window there. So, one of them that somebody said to me that is pretty good. And I thought of this, but I was afraid if I said it, people would be like, dude, you're giving the Pacers too much credit. Pearl Jam. Because Pearl Jam, if you look at the teams in the 90s that broke through, the Pacers really broke through in the 90s, right? If you look at the teams that broke through in the 90s, actually the Sonics were really good. Obviously the Pacers, the Knicks were good. Some of those have dropped off. And if you look at Pearl Jam, they broke through in the 90s, and they have maintained the relevance all the way through, whereas others have either the teams have broken up, or the franchises like Seattle has moved altogether, and they're in Oklahoma City now. So that would be, whether you want to say that that's Nirvana or that's, one of the other grunge bands that broke up or moved or, whatever else. I think Pearl Jam is decent for the Pacers.
Foo Fighters?
Foo Fighters, though, would be, and again, I'm going to show my age here. Foo Fighters, to me, would be more like Oklahoma City Thunder.
Okay.
Because it's a spinoff of an initial hardcore, well-established band. Right? So, the Foo Fighters right now are massively popular. They have been for a while. The Thunder are very, very good.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Thunder are the Foo Fighters.
Sticking with my analogy of teams that ran into better teams, this website highlights ZZ Top because they ran into Prince and the Police for their 2 Grammys and got shoved out.
ZZ Top would be the Utah Jazz. Like had their little moment there,
Sure,
right?
Sure.
Have like they're well known. Like the Utah Jazz are known for the short shorts. ZZ Top's known for the long beards.
Yeah.
Like ZZ Top is the Utah Jazz, and of course, let's not forget, Jazz has 2 Z's, right?
Weezer?
Weezer's like, I would put Weezer at like the Toronto Raptors had like a 5-year, like a 3-year relevance when they first hit the scene, and then it was like, whatever happened to those guys?
Okay, Ben, we haven't mentioned Journey.
Okay, Journey's a good one. Now Journey would be, man, I would put Journey as the Philadelphia 76ers. They have been consistent and been around for a long time. They have changed lead singers when they went from a lead singer that everybody knew, and then they brought in a smaller lead singer but was still really good and maintained the same relevance. And in addition to that, had in that 83 team and the Dr. J move with the famous move that Dr. J has is a signature song that lives forever, right? And Journey has a signature song that lives forever. So Journey is the Philadelphia 76ers.
Is anybody Coldplay?
This is the stuff that keeps me awake at night. And then you guys go, this is actually not bad, right? Coldplay, good one. Okay, so Coldplay. So who is a team that burst onto the scene really within the last 15? Coldplay is the Golden State War. No, because Golden State at least has a history because Chamberlain played there. Who's a team that that has only become good in the last 15 years, 20 years, but was really at the top of their game for a while there? The Dallas Mavericks?
Maybe, but if we're going off of hardware, Coldplay's won 7 Grammys over that span. So it might be the Warriors.
Memphis?
Not enough hardware.
Memphis hasn't won, though,
Yeah.
But here's the thing, though. Coldplay, though, when did Coldplay?
03?
Yeah, so
99,
so
03,
only in the last
02?
25 years has anybody even known of Coldplay. The Warriors actually have one of the longest and
Milwaukee?
proudest traditions. Okay, Milwaukee's not bad. Because they have a
97.
title.
By the way.
Milwaukee's not bad for Coldplay, right? Because I could go with the
What about the Spurs?
Okay, good one. Really? Okay, there we go. That might be the
Because
Spurs
their
might
run
be
fits
Coldplay.
the same as
And the Spurs, you are correct. The Spurs, like it's only been in the last 20 years they've been relevant, but they've been massive, right?
Yeah.
The Spurs might be Coldplay. That's not bad.
Yeah.
That's not bad. Now, then you have, like the Nuggets. Like the Nuggets to me would be who's somebody that just hit the scene in the last 5 years. Been around for a while, but just suddenly became big in the last 5 years.
Are we sticking with bands?
Yeah. Like who's a trendy band, like a trendy one, right?
AJR, Eddie?
I have no idea who that is.
Okay, my bad. I don't know. I'm not a big band guy, and honestly, the way the modern music has shifted, I tend to go more mainstream with my music. There's not as many like Green Day's too old. Like that's late 2000s, and they had their run then. You can't go with Panic at the Disco.
Somebody said Metallica for the Celtics, not been around long enough. Like for the Celtics, it's got to be a band that is the longest running band. I mean, the Celtics have been the preeminent franchise for the totality of the NBA, essentially. So that's why it's got to be the Rolling Stones or Aerosmith, either one, and this with the Lakers and Celtics, interchangeably, because they're the 2 longest running bands. The Who would be up there as well.
Imagine Dragons, maybe.
The Magic Dragons have to be the Magic, right?
Imagine Dragons, but yeah,
Imagine
sure,
Dragons.
right,
I
yes.
mean, yeah, they have to do the Magic, right?
Probably, yes.
At any rate, NBA talk that is not related to bands, I promise, because Evan Sider is going to join us next. NBA trade deadline is a week from tomorrow, and the Pacers may be in discussion, or are they? We'll find out exactly that next. 1 week from tomorrow is the trade deadline for the National Basketball Association. Is Indiana going to be a franchise in play, whether because Kevin Pritchard is picking up the telephone to make a phone call or because his phone is ringing because there are pieces for the Pacers that could be available? Obviously, Miles Turner is the big question mark. Joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line to talk about that and more from Forbes is Evan Sidery, who is a friend of the station. And Evan, first off, congratulations, because I know you are now dipping your toe into the NFL ranks in terms of coverage as well as NBA, correct?
Correct. Yeah, I'm going to be starting with Pro Football Network, PFN, after the trade deadline here, so looking forward to that.
Okay, so you've got another week here of hyper-focus on the NBA. So let's begin with the big question, and that is this. Miles Turner. Is Miles Turner a piece? We in Indiana know the value that he brings to the Pacers, but do you believe that he is a piece that will be highly coveted or moderately coveted by other teams in terms of their inquiry?
Personally, I have no intel on that, Jay. I personally think he would get a lot of teams interested. Every single team, especially in today's NBA, where you need every big man to shoot threes and protect the rim well to stay on the court. He fits really every single contending team, I imagine, as far as any potential trade packages go. I know a lot of people want to say the Lakers again as far as a potential team that makes sense for him. But I keep coming back to the point for me where is it worth it for the Pacers to trade him for, let's say, 2 first-round picks? Because Miles Turner's, I know he gets a little bit of criticism in Indiana from some fans, but not a lot of guys have his archetype in today's NBA. And those skill sets from big men are highly, highly coveted. It makes you wonder. I think he's personally worth keeping around long-term. I think he deserves a new long-term contract. I just think the big question is that do they want to pay $30, $35 million a year to make that happen?
Evan, you highlighted this yesterday on Twitter. You can follow him at eSidery on the X Twitter. But 3 years ago, basically to the day, the Kings decide they have an embarrassment of riches in their backcourt, and they're going to move on from Tyrese Halliburton and keep De'Aaron Fox. Now it's announced yesterday, earlier this week, De'Aaron Fox wants out. They're thinking about shipping him off in something that seemed unfathomable at this point of where the Kings were a couple years ago, and thinking, all right, they finally turned a corner as a franchise and they have building blocks to build around. How did this all go south so quickly? And do you imagine if we gave truth serum to the Kings, they would have second thoughts about moving on from Halliburton in hindsight?
Yeah, looking back on that, Jimmy, it really is incredible. 3 years ago, you think the Kings are well on their way up after that big playoff run they had a couple years ago with Sabonis and Fox, and now they're going to have neither Halliburton or Fox, which is, I think, says a lot about the Kings and their mismanagement as far as I think the reason why they got here in the first place was they made these moves as far as Sabonis, but they have one of the worst benches in the NBA every single year. They have little to no depth. Their GM is mentioned a lot in rumors, but he never capitalizes. He's kind of that guy where Monty McNair, where he's kind of always in talks, but he never gets across the finish line. And that's kind of the wrap, I think, for him in Sacramento, where De'Aaron Fox has said multiple times that he wants pieces to win now in Sacramento. He doesn't want to leave Sacramento. But for him, I just think it's at the point where now you're seeing Rich Paul get involved. Once you saw that, I think it's the writing's on the wall in a big way that he wants out of the Kings. I think he wants a winning situation. And then for the Kings, it makes you wonder, where do you go from here? Because you had Fox. You chose him over Halliburton. Now you just have Sabonis, who's a great player. He's having a career-best year, by the way. But is he a guy you can build around in today's NBA? That's going to bring a lot of questions, I think, long-term for the Kings. But it's kind of sad, I think, for Sacramento's point of view, where you pick kind of the wrong guy, and the right guy you chose ends up wanting to leave him in the first place.
It's interesting, though, because they have, Evan, since they inserted him into the starting lineup, Malik Monk has really found kind of this rebirth. Well, actually birth, I guess, because his game has elevated greatly. But obviously that's not going to be enough to offset the loss of a De'Aaron Fox. Is Sacramento a market? And maybe, and I ask this because I think people think this of Indianapolis, is it a place where they are obviously a little bit handcuffed because it's not a desirable destination spot for a player unless it's a spot where a player's career began?
Right. It's a small market team, Jake, and it's also an owner that's unwilling to go into luxury tax. As far as Vivek Ranadive, it's been known for a while. He's not been willing to go past that threshold, similar there in Indiana with the Simon family. But I do think for them, it's tough. Like, you have to internally develop, and De'Aaron Fox is kind of their one big piece that they've swung and hit on in the last 6 or 7 years. And then now you're seeing them at this point, they're going to be starting back from ground zero. You got to hit on those guys. You got to make sure you get the right pieces around them at the right time. And ironically enough, to tie it all back to the Pacers for a moment, we remember last year the Kings aggressively pursued Pascal Siakam on the trade market before he ended up going with the Pacers, and they had a deal in place, and Siakam didn't want to go there. He preferred the Pacers over the Kings. So I think that says a lot about where the Kings were and now where they are today, and then also a positive note for the Pacers, of course, where they went from there on.
Evan Sidery is our guest, covers the NBA for Forbes. NBA trade deadline a week from tomorrow. Evan, we know the Pacers are pretty cap-strung with where their finances are, likely eliminating them from being a third team unless they got really creative in one of these trades that you've been focusing in on. Let's say they stand pat. As you look around at the rest of the rumors surrounding the Eastern Conference, what are the best and worst case scenarios for the Pacers if they stand pat and keep this roster as their outlook for a push in the playoffs come April?
Yeah, I think they will end up staying pat, to be quite honest, Jimmy. I don't see why you'd rock the boat with a big move or even a marginal move with the way they've been playing, especially those young guys. But I would say the one thing to keep an eye on as far as potential swing piece, that if he stays in the Eastern Conference in a trade, that'd be Cam Johnson. He's been heavily linked lately to the division folk Cleveland Cavaliers, and I think he makes an awful lot of sense there in Cleveland. I think they're willing to give up a couple prospects, probably their future first-round pick in 2031. If they end up getting a guy like Cam Johnson, that makes them even more of a prohibitive favorite alongside the Celtics in the Eastern Conference. We'll see where Zach LaVine might end up going. He's been in a lot of rumors lately that the Bulls might end up just officially trading him. You know, he's been in rumors for the last, I think, 3 years at this point. I think Milwaukee's interested in him too. So let's say they end up in Milwaukee, like a Cam Johnson in Cleveland and a Zach LaVine in Milwaukee, for example. Now you have 2 or 3 fortified teams there up top where it's going to be really, really tough for the Pacers to get back to where they were last year if they get that draw again.
From what you hear, Evan Sider is our guest from Forbes talking about the NBA trade deadline. And looking through things of other teams, other markets, talking to other people that cover other teams and other markets, do you hear at all any chatter about the possibility, not of Indiana in terms of people looking for Miles Turner, but players that Indiana might be inquiring about? Or do you get the impression that Indiana, unless their phone rings, is content to stay put?
Yeah, I've heard nothing on Indiana, and that's not surprising. I think that's because they've seen how, I think, the positive turn, most notably, I would say, from Jarris Walker and Bennedict Mathurin over the last 6 weeks during their winning stretch after that embarrassing Hornets loss last month. Those guys have really turned a corner. And then, of course, you see Andrew Nembhard get back in the lineup after injury. He's become truly the glue piece of this team as far as keeping that defense to an average to now an above average to an elite level. And he's become an even better offensive player in that process, too. So I think those young guys, if you would have said, let's say 6 weeks from now, when really Jarris Walker wasn't getting much minutes, and if he was, it wasn't really good in that stretch. If he would have kept going down that hill in a negative direction, I think we would have said, hey, are you willing to give a Jarris Walker and a pick for a Cam Johnson? And I think that maybe people at that point would have said yes. But I think with the way that he's looked so far over the last 6 weeks, I think he's probably going to stay put and he's going to develop more in Indiana. But Bennedict Mathurin, too. I mean, he's looked a lot better as far as being a system player over the last month or so. So I think the Pacers stand pat. I've heard nothing on that. I don't think there's really been no national scuttlebutt with him. I heard a Cam Johnson rumor before, but I don't really see it at this point as far as making that kind of big move. So I would say the Pacers probably stand pat here, but they could come out of nowhere and make a move, as we all know.
Evan, sometimes when we get close to a trade deadline, there's language surrounding a certain player along the lines of, well, they're waiting for that domino to fall before all the other moves occur. Is Jimmy Butler truly that domino holding things up from really getting going before the deadline? Or are we approaching a point where teams are just going to have to say, you know what, that's Miami's headache, we're going to have to pivot and go do other things?
Yeah, I think Jimmy Butler is that domino, and I think we're getting really close to a deal, to be quite honest. I'd be surprised if by the end of this week there isn't a deal, just because the Heat, and we're seeing it in real time, how ugly it's getting with Jimmy Butler and the Heat, where they're suspending him 3 times in the last 3 weeks for different issues, and he's becoming just a big nuisance for them in their facility. So I would be stunned at this point if he's not traded, and I think it would be probably by this week. And keep an eye on the Suns, because we saw them get those 3 first-round picks from the Jazz, trading their 2031 first-round pick. If the Suns can't find a team that wants to take on Bradley Beal, and that's quite honestly probably the worst contract in the NBA, is making $50 million in the next 3 years with a no-trade clause, I think that we'll probably see the Heat pivot here pretty quickly to a team like the Grizzlies or the Bucks, for example, and take a discount deal for Jimmy Butler. I think I'd be really surprised there's not a deal within the next couple of days.
But isn't Jimmy Butler a great player? And I love his competitiveness, but doesn't he basically turn into a pain in the ass everywhere he goes?
He does, yeah. He's kind of like the NBA's version of Jim Harbaugh, so to say, where you go a couple places
right.
for 2 or 3 years.
Cash it in for 3 years before it gets stale quick, right?
Exactly, it's exactly right, and you're seeing success wherever Jimmy Butler goes. They make a playoff run, they make a couple finals pushes, but he does wear on people. He is the true definition of a diva in today's NBA. He has a big ego, a big attitude, and I mean he's a great player. He'd be a great fit with the Suns, and I don't blame the Suns at this point because they're all in. They paid $500 million for this roster. It hasn't worked. Might as well just go all in at this point and make it work and see what happens. But I think Jimmy Butler probably gets traded next couple of days. But he's a legit top 30 player. But, yeah, the headache we're seeing in real time is pretty tough.
And the age is, he's not 25 anymore either, which has to come into play as well when you factor in the money. Evan Sidery, his work at Forbes covering the NBA trade deadline 1 week from tomorrow. Appreciate it, Evan, and I know it's going to be a busy week for you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime. Appreciate it, guys.
All right, Evan Sidery joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. If Jimmy Butler's a diva, then that means on this program we've got a Jimmy and a Jimmy Butler, right?
I think that would be correct.
Is that
yes,
right?
Yeah.
Eddie, you're a diva. Is that what we're getting at?
Sure. I can take one for the team, I guess.
I listen.
See, that's the opposite of a diva.
I have my diva tendencies.
Sure.
But for the most part, I'd like to think that I'm low maintenance. I'm not high maintenance like Jimmy Butler, right?
I would agree.
Speaking of Butler, Jimmy, not Jimmy Butler, but Jimmy Cook, asked an interesting question involving not just Butler, but your favorite basketball team, regardless of who you root for in the state of Indiana. We will discuss his question next. So last night, and listen, I think a kind of and I would say sleeper for the Final Four. I know that sounds ridiculous, but we're not even in February yet. And it's not a sleeper if a team's been ranked in the top 10 all year. But people talk about, especially this year, you're always going to have conversation around Kansas. And obviously Duke is unbelievable. And Auburn has been, they are really, really good. And, Bruce Pearl's a heck of a coach. One of the teams that I think is good as any in college basketball, but we don't talk a lot about them just because they don't have maybe the league cachet right now.
Iowa State?
Iowa State's one of them, for sure.
Cyclones.
Iowa State in both sports, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both sports, it's like, man, I think Iowa State, by the way.
They lost a tough one the other night to Arizona.
But, yeah, Arizona hit like a three-quarter court shot, right, to force overtime and then pulled away in overtime. But
Yep.
That hurt Eddie's wallet.
Iowa State, I think of it in their basketball program of late, and I realized that Purdue broke through and got to a Final Four. But, they feel kind of like Purdue in the fact that they are really good every year, but you don't hear about them because they don't have, the overall national chatter of sexiness of the other brand schools. But the one I was going with was Marquette, and I think Marquette's really good. So there's not a shame in Butler losing to Marquette, but the way in which they lost by just simply playing ugly. And, Jimmy, you asked an interesting question when I got here today, and we were talking about the situation now that the state of Indiana is going to find itself in, very likely or possibly coming up in 6 weeks because of the fall-off of Butler and Purdue once again basically being Neil Armstrong and being the one carrying the flag up on top of the moon, right?
If the results hold where they stand, and I'm including the big-time programs in the state. So that's Notre Dame, Indiana, Butler, and Purdue. You can fight me with who belongs in that list, who doesn't, but those are from your Power Five or your illustrious conferences within the state of Indiana. If the results hold for the 5th time in the last 9 seasons, Purdue will be the only school representing the state in the tournament of those teams. And it speaks to the dominance of Matt Painter. It speaks to the consistency of that program. It speaks to them having a system, a strategy, and a blueprint from off-season to preseason to the regular season and postseason and beyond of excellence and consistency. And for everybody else, especially some of the other programs that might puff their chest out a la Indiana that think they're still the cream of the crop, it's inconsistency, it's flaws, it's frustrations, it's fans calling for their head coach's job at home games and message boards, and it's darkness and despair. So on the one hand, it talks about the dominance of Purdue, but on the other hand, I just feel like nearly the last decade, we've looked around and been like, is there an Indiana team going to the tournament? Well, Purdue is, of course. Anybody else? No? Well, they're going to the NIT. That's nice. And that's not fully fair. I'm not going after the mid-majors as much. Indiana State should have been a tournament team last year. I still contend with that, and they obviously make that run all the way to the NIT championship. There's been pops for mid-major schools. When you look at teams that, in theory, have the resources, and there's varying from Indiana, Purdue, Notre Dame, and Butler, but teams that have the resources to be those pedigree schools, Purdue's been the only one that's done it on a consistent basis for nearly the last decade. And that's a praise and a tip of the cap to Matt Painter, but also pretty jarring for where basketball has been consistently around the other programs.
What year, this is one of those questions that I think, maybe I should have looked this up ahead of time. What year had the highest representation from the state of Indiana in the NCAA tournament? I'm pretty sure. I remember in 89, I got to think if Purdue went in 89. I would think they did because they were a number 1 seed in 90, and they were close to a number 1 seed in 80. Well, yeah, they were number 1 seed in 88. Todd Meyer would know, our executive producer. If Purdue went in 90, then you had Notre Dame, Indiana, Evansville, Ball State, and Purdue all in. 5. I can't imagine there was. Am I missing a year where there would have been more than 5? Evansville being kind of the curveball here, right, when they made it in 89. But my point being, it was so much fun back then when you would have all of these schools from the state of Indiana. And I mean, I even remember, working in television when we would travel for the NCAA tournament and divvying it up, and it's like, oh man, now we got Butler in the mix, like in the early Barry Collier years, and obviously Indiana and Purdue were just staples, right? And, occasionally Ball State would be in there. But it is weird to think that now it's become, the norm is the wrong word, but it's not overly shocking to the system to see a lone representation in the state. Now, Jimmy, you think, and you seem to be firm on this, you don't think Indiana's going to get in.
No, I don't.
It certainly feels at this point like unless they turn it around, they're in a world of hurt.
I mean, they still have opportunities to do so. And don't get me wrong, I would love to be wrong on this. As an IU fan, as an alum, I would love to be wrong on this and them to make the tournament. But they don't have a good win on the resume right now. Their best win is an inflated Ohio State win on the road that they barely survived with. You could make the case that a lot of people overvalued where the Buckeyes were at that point. That's not a signature win for me. Okay, the win on a neutral site, the Palestra against Penn State, all right, fine. Like, that's good. They're 2-7 in quad ones. And I don't have a bad loss. And then you look at the rest of the Big Ten play and you say, well, there's going to be opportunities. Who is going to have that Jalen Hood-Schifino, Trace Jackson Davis moment for this team at Mackey on Friday? Who's going to have that game? Right. I don't see it. And Baco's going to go for 35.
By the way, Purdue did not make it in 89.
Okay.
They were 15 and they were under 500, which an impressive comeback the next year by Gene Cady. But yes.
Balo's going to go off for 35. That's a loss. Wisconsin, they haven't won there since 98. What have they done this year to make me think that's going to change? That's 2 more losses there. The rest of the way, you're quad one, and these are games against teams that are ranked. If it's at home, it's a top 30 game. If it's on the road, it's a top 75
game.
And
they have 2 of those, right?
They have these 2. They have Michigan State on the road, Purdue at home, and Oregon on the road and Ohio State at home. They have what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 of those games left. You got to get 5 of them, 6 to give yourself a real resume that you could put up against other teams that are in your same spot. I don't see it for them. No, I think they're going to miss it.
Here's what makes me sad. There was a time when if you were Indiana, you knew, and yes, it's changed now because there are so many more games played, but you knew if you were Indiana, for most teams, the narrative was that a 20-win season got you in. And now that's probably become more like, 25, because there's obviously more games that are played now. But for Indiana, for a very long time there, and I know people can tell me that this, I remember one time, I can't remember, well, I know who it was, I'm not going to say his name, but I got into a furious on-radio argument, which in hindsight is probably pretty bad for the listener, about, I will always believe this. Back in the day in the NCAA tournament, when it came down to determining a 9 seed, an 18 or 19 win, Indiana or Kentucky or North Carolina always got benefit of the doubt over a 25-win Boise State.
You've seen it happen with Syracuse like 4 times the last 15
because
years.
They know
yes. Yep.
that they can take, back in the day, they knew they could take Indiana at 18 and 13, the 90 Indiana team. The 90 Indiana team started out 10 and 0. They go into the Big Ten, they go 8 and 10. They finish 18 and 10 going into the tournament, and they get in because they knew they could take Indiana at 18 and 10, put them as a 9 seed, put them up against California in the first round, and put them like an Albuquerque, and Indiana's going to have 10,000 people that are there, and the television ratings are going to be good because you had Bob Knight Theater, right? They knew it. And it's not just about the Bob Knight Theater. The cachet and the brand of Indiana now, that has expired. I think Indiana now has to get in on the same playing field and with the same criteria as a Minnesota, an Iowa State, or an Arkansas, whereas at one time they kind of got that like benefit of the doubt card that the Blue Bloods got. And yes, I still think they're a historic Blue Blood, but they're not a current one. And their cachet doesn't carry like it used to. And to your point, Jimmy, what you're talking about makes it more urgent for them to have to get it done, right?
I just don't I don't see a clear path unless they reinvent the way that they play on both ends of the floor. Because Purdue is a more physical team than you are. Wisconsin, the more physical team than you are. Maybe you win against Michigan. That's a quad one win, but they're not ranked. That's not a signature win at this stage with, year one of Dusty May. No disrespect to him, but just that's, I guess, an okay win at Assembly Hall. You're going to have to do something that I think a lot of people doubt you're capable of, which is go on the road to Mackey, go on the road at Wisconsin, or go on the road at Michigan State and go get a win that way. But they have 8 of these quad one opportunities left. They're 2-7 in quad one games. Those are the top 30 or top 75, depending on home or away, games you could play from a ranking basis in the country. It's one of the bigger tools the tournament committee uses. They're 2-7 there. They have 8 games left. I don't see how you don't get 5 wins, 6 wins from this stretch to be able to have any legitimate chance of getting in. And I don't think they're going to.
In terms of reinventing the way that you play, are the Colts going to have to do that? And when you look at who are the available free agents, what players are the ones that Chris Ballard's going to have to start figuring out some numbers to make sure they retain them? We'll get into that conversation next here. Query and Company, Wednesday edition. I thought it was a Thursday all day, but it's a Wednesday on the Fan. You know the difference between Johnny Ray and the three of us?
What's that, Jake?
That Johnny Ray, poor old Johnny Ray, sounded sad upon the radio. I'd like to think we don't. I'd like to think we are upbeat, happy-go-lucky, roll down the windows, baby. It's 40 degrees and sunny outside. Let's go.
Hell yeah.
We are 3 rays of sunshine on this Wednesday, right? I'd like to think that's the case. I had a guy on that LinkedIn, which is just Tinder for business, sent me a direct message. Matter of fact, I should read it here. And he said the following, and this is where I'm very flattered by it, and I was appreciative.
Is this where your humility comes into play?
Well, again.
I saw somebody complimenting you on Twitter because of your humility. I was like, we're not talking about the same person here, are we?
My humility is the top of the many lists of things about me that make me great. But the message that I received, somebody's applying for a position with the company.
Oh.
This from Doug. Hey, Jake, I'm a huge fan. Love your show. I would love to be the first guy added to the company via LinkedIn. Not a bad idea, right? Again, Tinder for business people,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
Possibly a role in logistics would be fitting. Keep crushing it. So should we make Doug the director of logistics? Because logistically speaking, if he loves the show. But when people say, huge fan, love your show, I get skeptical that maybe they're just, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's
Just
one of
being
those
nice,
things.
like they listen to a segment maybe, and then
Yeah, like a guy the other day was like getting on me saying like, you know, we've never mentioned that Mike Woodson and Quinn Buckner have a relationship. I'm like, dude, I've mentioned that
you
like
under a rock?
for like 2 years now. Like, where are you? You know what I mean? There are not many areas where that I know probably more than like IU basketball, truth be told. The Indy 500 would probably be one of those two. But either way, I was like, really? Okay.
Graveyards?
I do know the graveyards. And love the graveyards. But at any rate, good afternoon to you, and thanks for joining in. If you are just joining us here on the program.
Where have you been?
Thank you, Eddie. We've talked about the Pacers, the trade deadline a week from tomorrow. We talked a little college basketball as well. But let's get into the Colts conversation and just free agency as we move into the offseason. Here's what we're going to do, gentlemen. I'm going to name – now, Kevin Bowen's done a really good job of listing the free agents and kind of the pros and cons of all of them on our website at 1075thefan.com. He has listed the 14 main names of free agency that the Colts, are going to allow, obviously, to test the waters, or that will test the waters in free agency. And by the way, speaking of that, Kelsey Mitchell of the Indiana Fever, we had told you about a week ago the fact that there was, and I'm going to use it in lack of a better phrase, she essentially was franchise tagged by the Fever. The announcement today that an agreement has been reached, Kelsey Mitchell will stay with the Fever. That is, by all account and understanding, essentially she has agreed to play under a 1-year deal because there's a new collective bargaining agreement in the WNBA that comes for next year. So she will be in the fold, 19.2 points per game, entering year number 8 in the WNBA, and a key part of the Indiana Fever. Kelsey Mitchell will certainly be here this coming year, and then the Fever will get back to trying to get her to a long-term deal. But what this means is that the Fever have retained their ability to be the only team for this year that she can talk to in regards to a long-term contract. All right, here's what we're going to do on the Colts. I'm going to name 7 players. I heard Kevin doing this morning with Andy. I thought it was a good – actually, Kevin and Andy were doing it with Joel Erickson, but I thought it was a pretty good exercise because it gives you a good idea of a point to be illustrated. I'm going to give you 7 names that I want you guys each to tell me the 2 players that you would most prioritize in the list of 7 of the 7 that I'm going to name that you would like to see the Colts bring back. Okay. You have a maximum of 2. You can punt if you'd like and say, I don't know. I don't need that, right? Here we go. Group number 1, Ryan Kelly, Danny Pinter, Trayvon Bryan, Dio, EJ Speed, Julian Blackman. That is group number 1. Let's see. That's 3. I have 6 there. Oh, and Will Fries.
So 2 players out of that?
2 players out of that.
If we're operating underneath the assumption that he's going to play again this season, Ryan Kelly is 1.
Okay, so you would prioritize.
Yeah, I would keep the middle and the exchange man for Anthony Richardson. I would keep him. And then it would depend on the dollar amount, but I would run it back with Dio.
Oh, great. I forgot Grant Stewart, by the way.
Okay.
I'm gonna
I thought he was already back.
No, Grant Stewart is a free agent according to this list.
Okay.
I could be wrong.
From that list, I would say Dio Dengbo and Ryan Kelly.
Okay. So Dio and Ryan Kelly, you're okay. Eddie, now again, I'll read you the list again, Eddie.
Okay.
Because I didn't do a very good job the first time. Ryan Kelly, Danny Pinter, Brian, Dio, Speed, Grant Stewart, Julian Blackman.
I'm going with Will Fries. You mentioned him, right?
No.
I thought
Pay attention.
you said Fries to Jimmy. That's what I thought.
Maybe I did to Jimmy. Sorry. The list I'm giving you: Ryan Kelly, Danny Pinter, Brian, Dio, Speed, Stewart, Blackman. Sorry.
Okay. In this sense,
I agree with you on Fries, but we'll get to that.
I will go with Blackman
Okay.
and Dio.
Okay. Now, group number 1. Sam Ellinger, Joe Flacco, Trey Sermon, Ashton Dulin, Mo Alley Cox, Kylan Granson, and Will Fries.
Well, that's easy for me. Doolin and Fries.
Give me the list one more time. Sorry.
Sam Ellinger, Joe Flacco, Trey Sermon, Ashton Dulin, Mo Alley Cox, Kylan Granson, Will Fries. Dulin and Fries sounds like an order, doesn't it?
Yeah, I probably would agree with Eddie. I have it because nothing else from that list jumps out at me. Like Doolin's probably it if you force me just to take one. I'm tired of guard money. I think you can figure that out. And while I like Fries, I just think there's other areas of need. So that would be my pause there with how much dollars amount are going out to him in that regard.
Here is the point of the exercise.
He's coming off the fractured leg, so I'm assuming he's going to get a discount. If he doesn't get hurt, he was probably going to get a big payday because he was having a really good year.
The point of the exercise is this. The Colts have a roster that is very underwhelming. I just listed you 14 players that are free agents. That's essentially, what? I got to think if I did my math quickly here, but you're looking essentially at 30% of the roster? And there isn't a single player on there that you're like, oh gosh, I mean, if they're going to compete, they got to retain that guy. That guy's
Yeah.
How many and furthermore, on that list, how many of those players are going to force the Colts into a bidding war? How many of those players, if Chris Ballard says, let's say Chris Ballard calls Eddie on the phone, okay? And he says, Eddie, Chris Ballard,
Chris Ballard with the Colts.
That's right. I've got my arms folded right now. Shoot, I'm calling, look. And he says, I've got my flat brim hat, and he likes the fact that you've got a 9 1/4 hat. And so he feels a connection with you.
He's jealous of it, actually.
So he calls Eddie. That's right. And he says, listen, I liked your list, Eddie Garrison. I like the fact that Dio, Blackman, Will Fries, those are the big ones that you mentioned, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does he have to turn around and call Jim Irsay and say, boss man, I'm going to need a big checkbook here because these are guys that the rest of the league they're going to be calling for him, and we've got to get out in front of it. I'm not saying they're bad players. What I'm saying is, other than DeForest Buckner, Jonathan Taylor, maybe, Quentin Nelson, and honestly, maybe Grover Stewart. I don't know how many guys on the Colts roster are guys that would be deemed as really good pieces that would go in and start anywhere else right away.
Certainly,
Pittman would, I guess, but
certainly not alarm bells with this free agent class. Like maybe if you
Just
went through the whole roster, you'd find 4 or 5 guys. But yeah, with this class, you're talking about outgoing. There's not a name from that list where I lost my mind, like you pointed out. Holy cow, they're going to potentially lose that guy. Like it's not there for me. It speaks to where I was last year, where most of us were with why they were running it back. And I think for me, in terms of a philosophical shift, assuming, and Jake, you've brought this up before, how much does Jim Irsay limit the spending? I would go out aggressively and sign a piece for your secondary, whether that is a starting corner, whether that is a starting safety. I don't care. But I would get one of those pieces solidified for Lou Anarumo on that side of the ball. And then I would go get, unless you're going to draft Tyler Warren and he falls to you, I would go get a veteran tight end.
I just feel like this roster is predominantly a bunch of bi-level, two-bedroom track homes.
BC talent.
They're nice. They're nice, right? But they're in every neighborhood. If you can't get one, it's not like you're like, I just missed out on my dream home, because you just wait and you go 5 blocks north and there's more on there, right? Yes, BC talent, not Boston College talent, meaning, good to average talent. There, and I think that we all fell victim to this a little bit in assuming at the beginning of the year that they had like a really good roster of really good players. I think everybody basically at the beginning of the year was like, man, they got a good that's a good roster. Is it? Because one of the things that the Colts don't have how many players, Jimmy, would you say on the Buffalo Bills, the Baltimore Ravens, how many players on those rosters are like jump out players? I mean, they have more than the Colts, don't get me wrong. But one thing that we have seen and precedent shows in this town, you don't have to go back far in the history of this franchise to know, when you have a special quarterback, it lifts everybody on the roster more than any other position. The quarterback is the straw that is mixing the drink into whether or not it's really good or just, you can still see like the sugar grains that haven't dissolved yet, and it's too chalky. And they don't have yet a quarterback, and maybe they will in time. But at this point, they are behind the 8 ball in terms of their quarterback elevating the rest of the roster. And as a result of that, they have average players that look like average players. But a great quarterback can make average players good to very good players. They don't have that right now, and as a result, they have a roster that I think is pretty underwhelming.
Yeah, it's really hard to win in this league without top-tier quarterback play. And if you don't have top-tier quarterback play...
It's almost impossible.
Yeah, if you don't have top-tier quarterback play, then you're swimming amongst the middle-of-the-road, vying for a playoff spot, and occasionally you can find a veteran that's going to help you. Like, look, Tampa Bay doesn't overwhelm teams in terms of their overall roster construction. They have some good pieces, but they found a second or third tier quarterback in Baker Mayfield that was hungry, that elevated the rest of the roster. Like, that kind of things happen. And where the Colts are right now, if you're in the camp of Richardson's not going to work out, and that's regrettably the camp that I'm in. Like, I would love to see him make good, but I think there's too much working against him, barring, the new biometric guru that he's working with that worked with Josh Allen to be able to turn things around for him, Chris Hess. Outside of that, I don't know that you're going to get that one right. So where do you win in the margins? Where do you fix things so that you can have a competitive roster still in 2025? And for me, a lot of that starts on the defensive side of the ball and making a wish list with Lou Anarumo for what he wants for his multi-scheme look, because that, at the end of the day, is the only hope you have if you don't have the quarterback. And it's still not enough to win in the league, but the only hope to be a threat on a weekly basis, if you don't have the quarterback, is to be able to make life difficult for the other side's QB. And that's what they did in theory by hiring Anarumo. Now they got to get the personnel.
If you're scanning the channels on a rainy Sunday, especially this time of year, you're just laying around, it's 2 PM on a Sunday, you're flipping the channels, what show makes you stop?
Friends.
Okay, not bad.
Yeah, if it's a How I Met Your Mother or Parks and Rec rerun, I'll stop there.
Big Bang Theory.
I've never seen that show. That's about the 2 geeks and then the hot chicks, right? Is that it?
Yeah, that's
there's
a fair summary.
4 geeks.
If
and is one of them dating a hot chick?
Yes.
If the sports season is done and Family Guy's on TBS, I'll waste 30 minutes there and have a laugh or two.
So wait a minute. So what's the Big Bang Theory? And I know the show's like 25 years old. So they're like chemists or something, right? They're real smart guys?
Yeah.
And how many of them are dating a hot chick?
1.
And how did he get the hot chick?
She would. I don't even fully remember how.
They live in the same
happened.
apartment complex.
Yeah.
It's but he doesn't know, like, that dynamic. Like they.
Okay, so then the other hot chicks are friends with the hot chick girlfriend. Is that it?
I've never seen the show all the way through, but I get the brushstrokes
No.
of it. Most of the other nerds wind up marrying nerds.
No.
Or dating nerds. Truthfully,
no. Sheldon is the only one that marries a nerd. Raj is scared to talk to women, so he never ends up with anyone. And then Howard ends up marrying a girl through
Spoilers, by the way. Sorry,
his
world.
best friend.
Are they envious of the guy that has the hot girlfriend?
So the hot girlfriend hooks up Howard with
far,
her friend.
So far, this sounds like this show, right?
It's hard to explain if you don't know the characters.
I'm just for what it's worth, right? Anything you want to add there, Jimmy?
Haley Cook's a beautiful woman. I don't know that I need to be dragged into this. Thank you very much.
I'm being completely sarcastic.
I know you
here,
are.
But,
I know you are.
You know, but I'm just saying for what it's worth. Okay, so
The humility shining through that comment.
So if you are give me a team off the top of your head, the Atlanta Falcons.
Sure.
If you're the Atlanta Falcons on a rainy Sunday and you're sitting around and you're like, you know what, I'm bored, and so you're flipping through the channels of free agency, is there anybody on the Colts roster that you see and jumps out at you as How I Met Your Mother or Big Bang Theory or Friends? Is there anything that makes you stop? Or are you getting to it and all of a sudden it's the Home Shopping Network and they're showing, and you're like, okay, bang, you're gone.
DeForest Buckner, Michael Pittman Jr.,
I'm
and
saying
Josh
amongst
Downs.
free agents.
Oh, sorry. I thought you meant the whole roster.
Yeah, no,
of free
amongst
agents, no.
Nothing, right?
No.
That's my point.
Maybe
Kelly.
Julian Blackmon, maybe Ryan Kelly because he's a center that you can set it and
But
forget
Ryan
it.
Kelly's age has to be considered, right? I mean, granted, I think he wants to come back.
I don't think it's as much as age as much that it is the cloud over him of, is this the last season or not?
Yeah, right. I mean, health standpoint and everything else, right? I mean, the point being, and that is one where, and I'll give Chris Ballard credit here. I mean, we give Chris Ballard plenty of grief, right? One area where I will give Chris Ballard credit is at the beginning of the year when Ryan Kelly showed up at training camp and said, hey, listen, I wanted to do an extension, and the Colts told me they wanted to wait until the end of the year, and that still has yet to come. And we saw at times this year when he was banged up that it looks like they may on the roster have the guy that is their center in waiting, right? And so why would you pay free agent money there when you can get first contract money at that position and not have a huge drop-off in play?
I think
and Kelly's been the consummate pro, don't get me wrong.
I think Julian Blackmon would find a home pretty easily. I'm not saying he's a stop on the television type of guy, but I think Blackmon would find a home pretty easily.
Julian Blackmon, to me, at the safety position is a lot like Ryan Kelly in the fact that it's not a question of skill. It's rather just a question of availability, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he's dealt with it for certain over his career. But, I mean, you look at where he's going to rank. A lot of people label him as a jack-of-all-trades safety. He's a good player. He's not like an all-time great player, but he's a serviceable starter. I think he winds up somewhere else pretty easily if the Colts don't bring him back. But, yeah, it's a short list to your overall point, Jake.
Yeah. I mean, that's...
At least this class. Like, this class is not one where I'm over here pulling hairs about who they could lose.
I thought personally, a guy on that list, I agree on Will Fries. A guy that I've always been really high on, and I know that he is not a main piece guy, but I've always liked Danny Pinter, not because of Danny Pinter per se, but just because I think having a guy that can play at a couple of different spots, but just give you the offensive line in general, I think having a guy that can kind of Swiss Army knife for you and fill in holes on a 1 or 2 game basis at multiple spots is invaluable. I just think it's critically important, and he's done a good job with that. Is he blow you away? No. He's a donut tire, but you got to have some donut tires, right?
How much do you think they wind up paying Fries per year?
Man.
Like, if it's, am I underselling him to say, okay, $5.5 million a year, that's fine? Like, if it's any more than
7?
that, I can't, like, maybe I just don't value guard as much as others, but I don't want,
understood.
In a world where,
but guard is one of those positions, Jimmy, that you don't value it until it's gone.
sure, no, for certain,
Prime example is him, right?
Right, no, I don't dispute that, but I look at so many other holes that they have that if you get priced out on Will Fries, and I think Eddie's right, the injury is going to factor in where they're probably going to get lucky in that regard, but if you start getting into like $7, $8, $9 million a year for him, there's just too many other holes on this roster. Like, you can't do it.
What movie makes you stop?
Any of the Star Wars. Any Star
Are
Wars,
they
I'll put
on
it on
regularly?
for always on
regularly,
TNT
though?
or TBS
Okay.
around this time of year. You'll get
Eddie, what movie makes
one of
you
the
stop?
originals.
Oh, That's a good question.
I know one of them.
I never see it on TV though.
Fast Times?
I never see it.
Buddy, there are two versions of Fast Times at Ridgemont High. There's the version that you've seen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the better, not better, I mean, it's terrible, but then there's the also fun version where there are additional scenes that are in the television version because there are so many scenes they had to remove from the primary that they were like, wait a minute, this thing's now only like 51 minutes long. So there are a couple of scenes that are added in that are on the television version that you don't see in the regular version.
If one of the Oceans are on, Oceans 11 or 12 or 13, I'll put that on, a little Clooney, Pitt, Damon. Always
Okay.
love those movies.
That's fair. Castaway's been on a lot lately. For whatever reason, I find that I didn't like it when it came out. I'm just like, whatever, but it's a, and then, I mean, Shawshank is the creme de la creme. And every time Shawshank is on now, I get reminded because people tweet it to me and say, you need to have the boys over, Shawshank's on. But when we watch Shawshank, when you guys
I
come
thought
over
we
for
were having a private Super Bowl party, Jake, you and I.
That's right. That's a good point. You know what? I'd be down for that.
Okay.
When we watch Shawshank, we got to watch it though in the just the original format.
I still think, and I know this is above our pay grade, it goes to our sales department and stuff, but I still think we rent out a movie theater for whatever it is, $200, and we just have a company party of watching Shawshank at the local Regal. Like I still think that would be cool.
First off, I can't imagine that you can rent out a theater for $200.
I googled it and fell down a rabbit hole. One of those Jake Query
Really?
things. I
But
think
secondly,
I'm right on that.
then you've got to get them to find Shawshank on Reel and play it.
Well, can't they? Don't they have in theaters as well? I'm ignorant. I don't know. Like HDMI ports where you just put a DVD player up in there and you're good.
I know this much. Pat that listens to the show, he's one of the official movie bartenders of the show, and he runs the lounge there that's adjacent to the Landmarks Theater in Keystone.
Uh-huh.
And I can ask him if it's possible for them to like find the reel. Now, I don't know if you know this or not. Here's a fun fact.
That would be
for you.
awesome.
Here's a fun fact for you.
Okay.
Can you tell me the relationship between Hutchinson, Kansas, and both The Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, and in addition, other classic films?
I mean, the dumb guess would be scenes were all shot there.
Is that what you're going with?
Yeah, that's all I got. The show ends at 3.
Well, I'll tell you at like 1:30. There are only a handful of things when I was at the University of Kansas that I learned about the state of Kansas that are applicable to my worthless knowledge database in 2025. For example, there is a town in Kansas. Jimmy, you were just in Kansas City, Kansas, right?
Yes. And Missouri, but yeah.
There's a town in Kansas called Stull, Stull, which had an old broken down church that was rumored and was also written about in National Geographic magazine in the late 80s or early 90s as being an entry point to Hades.
It sounds very intimidating the way it's spelled.
It was. Let me tell you something. I went on. The guys in Kansas were all like, we got to go to Stull. We got to go to Stull because there was this rumor of this old church. I had told Kevin about this one time on the morning show that had allegedly a stairwell that like people were like, I started going down the stairs and they never ended and it got warmer and warmer. And so like it was believed within the occult to be a gateway. Okay. We went to this place on a beautiful Sunday afternoon in like late September. I mean, the perfect day of all, you know what I mean? 2 PM. Went to this church, and I'm telling you right now, I don't think the church is still there. I would never go back. I'm not even going to go into detail on it, but I don't believe in that stuff. And I was like, okay, I'll never go back to this.
Sounds like a sweet place to fight out of. Like with the Royal Rumble coming around the corner from Stull, Kansas.
It kind of does, doesn't it?
I think that could be a good billing for somebody.
Let me tell you something. It was unbelievable. But anyway, Emporia, Kansas was. I went there. My buddy Sean Hoog, and I saw this huge house, and I go, who lives there in Emporia, Kansas? And he goes, you remember in the like 70s those little plastic things that your mom hung her can of Tab soda from inside the car that hung off the windowsill? I go, yeah. And he goes, yeah, that guy invented those. Okay. And then Hutchinson, Kansas, okay? Hutchinson, Kansas is, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, when I asked guys that were from Hutch, as they'd called it, I'm like, no, where is Hutchinson? They're like, it's maybe actually McPherson, Kansas is the one that they would say it's the staple in your map when you were a kid because it's like in the middle of the state, right? But Hutchinson, Kansas has salt mines underneath it where the moisture in the air of the salt mine is like 80% diluted salt, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But as a result of that, in Hutchinson, Kansas, they have mines under the ground that have such a high salt content that it is the perfect atmospheric condition for the preservation of film.
Really?
So the actual original reels of Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz, and a bunch of other movies are stored in vaults underneath Hutchinson, Kansas.
Do they look around, and I realize this joke doesn't land because it's the Midwest. Well done with the dropping there. Any fault lines around there? We worry about that at all?
Or, for that matter, not like the Paris catacombs. There are no skulls, right? That's more in Stull, Kansas. But here's the thing. If we're going to do our Shawshank rent out a movie theater, are we going to have to go to Hutchinson because it's the original film stored in Hutch?
Do they have the original film of Drake Triumph there, too?
Eddie, you continue to torment me.
I refuse to believe that in modern movie theaters there's not an HDMI port to hook something up to in there.
Probably.
Or a spot just to drop a DVD in there. Because I know there's theaters that rent them out for parties. Like, I know those exist. So you'd think there'd be a way to, well, hey, I want to watch Mission Impossible 3. Okay, do you have a DVD copy of it? Yeah, here you go. All right, let's play it.
Hey, Jake, there's only one hot chick on Big Bang Theory. Is that right, Eddie?
Kaylee Cuoco.
But you said there were 4, right? I thought there were 4.
No. There's 4 guys.
Okay. 4 guys and only 1 girl?
No, there are 3 girls.
And only one's hot?
Yes.
One's hot, one's a nerd. What's the third?
That
kind of rhymes, doesn't it?
It did. Well done. Good bar.
Not sure.
It's kind of like this show. One's hot, one's a nerd. What's the third, right?
Well, I guess I'll wear the nerd crown there then. I don't want to be the mystery
I didn't say
meat.
who's who.
I mean,
I didn't say who's
I'm
who.
comfortable with who I am.
I'm just saying. I didn't say who's who. Pacers back in action tonight at the Fieldhouse, by the way, taking on the
Are you
Detroit
going?
Pistons. I am going to the game, yes. Is this the Pacers' biggest current rival?
No, I'm going to stick with the Bucks. I mean, maybe
Okay.
I'm going off a recency bias there, but like I do think if those teams meet again in the playoffs, there's going to be some bad blood and vitriol. Not the likes of what we saw at the height of Pacers Pistons or Pacers Knicks or the 90s of the NBA or even Pacers Heat to a more modern extent. But like I think that is the opportunity to be a budding stop. I mean, there was a lot of disdain, especially from Bobby Portis and Damian Lillard and Patrick Beverly, even though he's, across the pond somewhere now. But a lot of disdain from those Bucks about the Pacers last year. So I would go Milwaukee.
And keep in mind right now the Pacers
Also
are just
same
a
division.
game behind Milwaukee for that fourth spot, right? Then you got the Knicks at third. I still think the Knicks are their rival, but because it was so much fun last year.
And maybe it bubbles up
But
if they meet
others
again.
come and go. It's kind of funny because we talk about Pacers Knicks, understandably so, as the biggest rivalry, right?
If you're a 90s kid or older, that's your hub, right?
And here's the thing. I think Pacers fans latch onto and love the Knicks rivalry for two reasons. The first being it was the first one that enticed them into the NBA culture. And the second being the Pacers have had the upper hand in it. It's more fun to say the Knicks are the rival because the Pacers beat them in 95. Now, the Knicks got the better of them in 99, but the Pacers, in 2000, that's who they had to get through to get to the finals. The Pistons, on the other hand, there's a lot of bad blood there, but the Pistons have always had the upper hand. The year of, obviously, the brawl, the year before the brawl when Artest overslept and missed the team flight, and then they went there and he racked, I think it was Richard Hamilton, and they lost in the Eastern Conference Finals then, and the Pistons went on to win it. All of the rivalry aspect between the Pacers-Pistons have ended up with advantage Pistons.
It's much better to be the team that's looking down on the loser in the
Correct.
rivalry than it is to look up and be like,
Which is
man,
right
what could
now
have
for
been?
the Pacers-Bucks, that would be Indiana because they got it most recently over Milwaukee. But I tend to agree. But the other thing is this, though. The Pistons and the Knicks, the Bucks and the Knicks, the Pistons and the Knicks, those two have unlikable personalities. Going back historically, I'm saying.
Yeah.
I mean, the brawl, obviously, that goes without saying. And Ben Wallace, and and before that, Rasheed Wallace, and they had some likable guys. I mean, Richard Hamilton's pretty likable. Chauncey Billups pretty likable. And then the bad boys, it goes without saying. The Knicks, you obviously have a history of bad blood because of not just, Spike Lee and, the irritating Nat, but also players that you just didn't like. I didn't like Derek Harper. That guy was always yelling.
You talking about me or
But were you a Knick?
Derek? About being the annoying gnat or
The
whatever?
annoying Nat would be Spike Lee.
Okay.
Although, Eddie, you're in the conversation. The Bucks, other than Patrick Beverly, who's now no longer there, I think for the most part people find that Bobby Portis, obviously.
And Damian Lillard was talking some smack
Yeah.
last year about the Pacers. The Bucks were all up in arms about what happened in the in-season tournament like it was an anomaly, and they were clearly the better team. And I know they dealt with injuries last season, but in a league where we had this conversation yesterday with Scott Agnes, there's not many rivalries. You can't point to definitive rivalries anymore in the NBA right now. In a league where they're sparse, any level of smack talk from another team that has a holier-than-thou, we're better than you type of outlook, which is what Damian Lillard did last year, I think carries weight.
Yeah.
Because you just don't get it that much anymore.
And I just, I'm probably in the anomaly here, but I don't find Giannis unlikable at all.
I don't either.
I mean, and I know he wasn't a big part of, obviously, the series last year, but
He's also won before. Like, Dame has never won. He doesn't have this
Fair.
internal chip of like,
now,
who are these Pacers
Giannis
teams?
is getting a little bit more referee diva-ish, right?
Yeah.
But he's still, though, to me, especially when they won and he's driving around getting Chick-fil-A and everything else, he's a pretty likable guy.
Yeah, and it's an incredible story. Like, his whole family's journey and his spot from, being a next to nobody taken out of the draft to developing into this international superstar. I mean, it's It's a great feel-good
He
story.
was the 17th player, I think, right? Taken
Something
in
like
the year
that.
he was
Yeah.
drafted.
Nikola
Unbelievable.
Jokic was a second-round pick. Don't forget about that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of
Unbelievable.
international pieces that have made their way to the NBA have these stories of out-of-nowhere draft selections that turned into players of the era. Jokic is definitely that. Giannis absolutely is that. They both won titles. So, yeah, they're likable guys. I don't have a problem with either of them.
Mike DeCourcy is going to join us, by the way, coming up 20 minutes from now. Sporting News and Big Ten Network. And one of the stories within the Big Ten that you haven't heard a lot about, but I've got a feeling we're about to. We'll discuss that next. Mike DeCourcy coming up about 15 minutes from now. I'll tell you what, when you look at the Big Ten this year, and I'll be interested to talk to Mike about just the forecast of the conference in general. Obviously, we're at the point in the year now where you've got a pretty good idea of who and you know what everybody is, right? But one of the things that maybe it's just me, we've been so focused on Indiana and obviously Purdue and what Matt Painter's done and getting the Boilers right back up there towards the top of the conference, the job that Dusty May's done. even though Michigan, that water's finding its level a little bit now at 15-5, but still 7-2 in league play. We've talked about Mick Cronin, pointing out UCLA's travel woes, and it's like newsflash. We all knew that was going to be a possibility. But how about Michigan State? Is this the quietest 9-0 start, top 10 ranking of the Big Ten? And furthermore, how about the fact that when you look at them, it's balance. It's balance for Michigan State. It's not like they're one of those teams that has a guy that's getting you 26 a night and that's carrying them. They're leading, they literally seemingly have like 15 players that all average 9 a game. I know it's not that high, but and Tom Izzo is one, Jimmy, I'll be honest with you. I think there are a lot of people that felt like at this point Tom Izzo might have been living on laurels a little bit. He's a wonderful coach. I mean, he's a Hall of Fame level coach. Great coach. But the notion of like, oh man, Michigan State, Tom Izzo, March, never count out Michigan State. It felt like we were kind of living off that for a while there, right? And things had finally just kind of reached the plateau where you start thinking about what the next thing is going to be. But this is as good a coaching job as he's done in quite some time.
He's Mr. Consistent. Like when you look at coaches that, and maybe, I don't know, maybe the standard's higher at Michigan State. I don't want to pigeonhole them into this type of comparison, but you look at the most consistent coaches in the Big Ten Conference right now. It's Tom Izzo, it's Matt Painter. That's your list. Those are the two most consistent coaches within that conference. They are most consistent coaches. You can make the argument in terms of making the tournament and being a presence there of the better part of the last decade. I mean, you're right, certainly, that there's always forced chatter of Izzo in March. Don't pick against him in a 7-10 matchup or in a first-round game. Like, they're going to go make a move there.
February. Izzo.
Exactly. Yes, exactly, Eddie. It is Tom Izzo's month. I mean, they're, about 11 years removed from their last... No, I'm wrong on that. They are only 6-7 seasons removed from the last time they made a Final Four. Like, he's still been pretty consistent, always making the tournament, and every 5 or 6 years putting together the right pieces to make a run to be the last 4 or the last 8 that are there. So I don't know if it's as much of his laurels as much as it is he's built a reputation, and in an era where everything is changing in NIL and everybody wants to point and make excuses, he's still thriving at 69 years young. It's pretty incredible.
I don't want to discredit what Michigan State has done, Jake, but if you look at their schedule, they have not played anybody since their last loss against Memphis. The only one I'll adhere to is Illinois, and that was at home. Like,
so you're
Carolina
saying it's about to get real for them?
Yeah, Carolina's bad. Nebraska was at home. Minnesota's bad. Ohio State, they were in a losing skid when they played Ohio State.
Off the bottom feeders here, right?
Yeah, like they have UCLA, Oregon, Indiana, Illinois, Purdue, Michigan, Wisconsin.
Their tough stretch starts next weekend because, to your point, Oregon at home and then Indiana, but then they go at Illinois, they have Purdue, they go at Michigan, at Maryland, and then they host Wisconsin.
But they also already have, and I'm not disputing Eddie's point. He's right. It's going to hit the fan here in the coming weeks when they really get into the meat and potatoes of Big Ten play. But they have a win over North Carolina. They have a win over Illinois.
Oh, stop! They have North Carolina.
Look, you can fight it all you want.
They're 13-9.
You can fight it all you want. It is by measurement of the law for how they measure things in terms of ranking and seeding of what you're going to have in March Madness, a quality win.
Okay, let me ask you this,
they don't have
Jimmy,
a bad loss yet.
To clarify this.
Yeah.
For those listening and keeping score at home, a quad 1 win. So to back this up, when you watch on Selection Sunday and they are going over, teams that are on the bubble and they read off people's resume of what makes them, on the bubble or off the bubble. And they always have that column where they bring it up. And they say, let's take a look now at, whatever. I mean, insert name of school. And in the left column, they're quality wins and then they're bad losses. The quality wins now, the new thing has become, these are quad 1, quad 2, etc. Please define for me a quad 1 win.
A quad 1 win is a home win against a team ranked top 30 in the country. A quad 1 win is also a win on a neutral court against the top 50 team in the country and an away win against the top 75 team in the country.
Now, here's the burning question.
Sure.
Does that mean ranking at time of victory or ranking it end of year?
It's solidified once it happens. So North Carolina is worse than they were at the time of the win.
When
but
they beat North
still,
Carolina, and North Carolina was ranked 13th. If North Carolina did not win another game the rest of the year, it still counts as a quad
1 win. Yes, correct. I believe I haven't studied it that closely. There's a chance I'm wrong on that, but I believe it still stays where it was when the win happened. That's a great question.
No, I think it moves.
I would need.
It's like George Costanza getting a massage.
We'll find out if Eddie's point about North Carolina continues. They're at 42 right now. If they fall 9 more spots, that's going to become a quad 2 win. I don't know the intricacies of that part of it. That's a fair question. I don't know.
By the way, I thought of this yesterday. The sports talk radio stations in, Charlotte, for that matter.
We can ask Mike DeCourcy, by the way, coming up. He would know the answer to that question.
Okay, yeah, he will know.
Yeah.
Sports talk radio stations in Charlotte and Raleigh, are they having the same discussions, and are the fans of North Carolina having the same call-ins and the same concerns and the same chants about Hubert Davis that Mike Woodson's getting in Indiana? I mean, he's a great player. He's an alum. He's a Nick, right?
I mean,
and he's back there, and he's had success, obviously.
But those were with Roy's guys. They weren't his dudes. These are all his guys now.
The standard at North Carolina is top tier in the country, so they probably are. But I think that people that look at fan bases as greedy or as ungrateful or as, over eccentric would say, I mean, you're 2 seasons removed. That's assuming you don't do anything this year. You're 2 seasons removed from your last Sweet 16 appearance. You're 5 seasons removed from your last trip to a national championship game.
Gosh, was it that
to
long
Eddie's
ago?
point,
when
it
you
was
were up
with
16, by the way.
Correct. And then Kansas came storming back. To Eddie's point, though, it was with Roy Williams recruits. And it's the same argument that you're having in Indiana. In a league around the NCAA and the resources of a blue blood and the Tar Heels in NIL, you should be running circles around teams.
It does.
You have
feel,
every advantage.
Listen, it does feel like of any program, there is no excuse for Carolina.
You know what else, though? To your point, there's another parallel here. From what you've seen John Schreier do from Duke's perspective to what Mike Woodson's dealing with Matt Painter's success. Because you have your 2 successors
Correct.
to Williams and Coach K.
Which burns the heat higher, right?
And Duke has been, still pretty consistently getting guys, and I know they're not winning national titles, but they feel way more stable than North Carolina does.
Duke right now, though, I mean, they are very poised this year to be right in the mix, right? And what he's done as an alum, very good point. Schreier has carried on seemingly the blueprint of what was handed to him by his boss.
And that's what you want in a school like that. And that's what you would want if you're a North Carolina fan, is look at all the success Roy had. Here's the keys. Go do the same thing.
This is why I would be frustrated if I'm Carolina, and why I think Indiana fans are frustrated. Carolina, truthfully, and I'm biting my tongue as I say this, but North Carolina realistically is what Indiana thinks it is. Carolina has all of the inherent advantages that I think Indiana fans feel Indiana still has, because we forget, for Indiana's standpoint, that it's a lifetime ago to today's player. It's not for the North Carolina players, because you go in, I don't know if you've ever been to the Dean Dome, but you go to the Carolina Basketball Hall of Fame, the first thing you see when you walk in is a huge thing of Michael Jordan, obviously, right? Well, he's pretty relevant, right?
Yeah.
He is still the most relevant figure in basketball, really, even to young people. And then in addition to that, they have recent success. They have names galore and players galore that are still in the league and playing in the league, and they do have They just have cachet, right? Those uniforms are pretty sweet.
The one thing I would push back on, and I know it's all that matters, is winning. That's it. If you're not winning consistently, then you're going to get forgotten. And that's been the danger point for Indiana basketball for the better part of the last 25 years. They have all the resources. They are as, even with what Signetti did last year, they are as core a basketball school as you will find in the country. There is still legacy cachet there. I know some people don't care for them. I love the candy stripe pants, the green and crimson look. Like it's a staple of college basketball. But you have all the NIL funds. You have all the alumni base committed to your success. You have world-class facilities. You need the right guy driving the car. And they haven't had that. People will still fight me on this because of how it ended, and he was cocky while he was here. They haven't had a glimmer of that since Tom Crean. They just haven't.
The problem with Crean, the Tom Crean era is like Full Metal Jacket. Started out, in the beginning, I mean, you knew going into it so the first year or two, take that out because you knew going into it.
It was a full-on rebuild.
Correct. But it was great. The first 70% of his tenure at IU was great. I think the thing that really hurt Tom Crean, ironically enough, was the success of Dwayne Wade out of Marquette and then Oladipo and probably even Juwan Morgan because, OG Anunoby really developed his athleticism alone is what he was drafted on. But I think that Crean, because he had success with dark horse players or diamond in the rough players, he then started overreaching way too much in terms of recruiting and going after guys that it was like, wait, who? What? Tim Priller, Grant Gilon, and I think it set him back. I think it hurt him.
If you gave me the choice, and maybe I'm on an island in this, I'm gifted with hindsight, and admittedly, I was one of the people that was done with the Tom Crean era. If you gave me the choice of the 8-year stretch they've had with Miller and Woodson or 8 more years of Crean,
Understood.
I'm not thinking twice about it.
Understood.
I would have run it with Crean 8 more years.
And of course,
that's a hindsight argument.
I totally understand why he's not there, and I'm glad he's not there, but it's a hard pill to swallow to realize that from an X's and O's standpoint, the best basketball coach Indiana's had since Bob Knight left is now in Houston. And that kind of hurts to say.
Mm-hmm.
Mike DeCourcy next. It is 2 o'clock in Indianapolis. For that matter, it is 2 o'clock everywhere in the Eastern time zone. Good afternoon to you. My name is Jake Query. Jimmy Cook, Eddie Garrison, the other voices you hear on this program on Fox. I almost said my old station. On 93.5, 107.5, The Fan. Old habits die hard,
What in the
right?
world?
Well, part of the Fox family is the BTN network, and that's where you find Mike DeCourcy, of course, the dean of writers from the Sporting News as well when it comes to college basketball. He is on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Mike, I'm going to begin with you a question that we were just discussing, and you can clarify it for us. When a team's tournament resume is being evaluated and you are determining a quad one win and you are factoring in the ranking of an opponent you defeated, is it ranking at the time of the game, or does that team have to be ranked at the end of the year for it to count for you?
Well, let's make sure that we understand the use of the word rank, because that's often conflated with poll rankings, which don't mean anything.
Okay, so would it be?
We're talking quad positioning, Mike, to clarify.
Yeah, I know you guys know, but listeners hear the word rank,
right?
And
yeah, it's not the AP top 25, right?
Yeah, we in the media use ranked wins and all that stuff, and it doesn't matter. I mean, it's a show. That part's a show. What matters is what you accomplish relative to, in terms of quad victories. It's what you accomplish relative to the teams in the various rank designations. The 1 to 30 at home, 1 to 50 neutral, 1 to 75 away, and that is all determined on where that team stands at the time you are examining it. So if I do my bracket for Fox Sports Thursday for Friday, I'm looking at the quad records that are as of that moment. It's not like if Auburn played Duke on back in December 4th, because I was there. I don't know what Duke was then, and it doesn't matter. But now it's the loss that Auburn suffered on that night to Duke was to the number 3 team in the net, and that's how it will be. And then if Duke climbs to 2, and they have been as high as 2, I think, then it'll be to the number 2 team. And if they fall, then it'll be to the number 7 team.
Okay,
but
so in other words,
relative to the time.
And I don't think this is going to be applicable, Mike, because I think they're a really good team that's going to stay up there. But just for the sake of the discussion, Michigan State has an earlier season win over North Carolina. Now, North Carolina has obviously slid since that time. So at the end of the year when you're evaluating it, where North Carolina was in terms of how competitive they were in November or whenever that was is not applicable. It's where North Carolina is today that helps or hurts Michigan State, correct?
Yeah, and part of that is because, in all honesty, North Carolina's never been good. I mean, they've not been good at all this year. Now, they've not been bad. I was actually at their game last night against Pitt, and they've not been bad, but the really good teams they've beaten, and they probably played more than they should have, they lost. And the really bad teams they've played, they mostly won. And that's the problem with Carolina right now is they don't do anything exceptional, and they don't demonstrate to you that they're at the level of those teams that they're losing to. The better teams, the Dukes and Michigan States and such, they're not on that level, and they've done nothing to show that they are. But at the time that Michigan State played them, they were probably ranked in the AP top 25, so it seemed consequential, and the Carolina name carries great weight. But there's a chance. I haven't begun the process yet, but there's a chance that the next time I do my bracket, Carolina will be out of the field.
You know, when you look, and this time of year, Mike, maybe it's still we need more body of work to know it, but whether it be because they've exceeded the expectation you thought going in or they have fallen short of it, what team in the Big Ten would you say right now has turned in the biggest surprise to you?
Well, I'd say probably it's been Wisconsin because they have shown. Although again, what Wisconsin has done is beaten everybody that would be considered equivalent to them or slightly superior. And then the only games they've lost are to those, with one exception, are to those that are markedly superior. That's been who Wisconsin has been this year. And I thought I don't ever expect them to be poor because they're never poor. but every year they get underranked, underrated in preseason projections. The media projection prior to Big Ten Media Day, I think had them in double digits. And I don't remember whether it was 10, 11, 12, whatever, but I'm pretty sure they were in double digits in that. And they're now right near the top of the conference. They're probably not going to win the league because, again, you probably have to beat a Purdue here or there or a Michigan State in order to get that. But they're going to be in the top echelon of the league when we get done.
Mike DeCourcy is our guest. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Mike, I know that this has a tendency to happen in talk radio. I'm not trying to be hot takey with it. It's just where I believe they're at as a program. I said it a couple weeks ago. I stand by it now. I don't think Indiana's making the NCAA tournament. I don't think that stylistically, the way they play, and just overall what's left on them for the schedule's sake is enough to get them in. Is there any part of you that pushes back against that, not just in terms of the fact they still have a good amount of quad one wins to bolster the resume, but is there anything in terms of where they're built and what's ahead of them that makes you think, maybe pump the brakes a little bit?
Well, I mean, what they would have to do is be something that's other than what they've been. They have to play outside of the personality that they've established for this year's team. I mean, they go to Purdue, to Wisconsin, home Michigan, Michigan State over the next 4 games. And then let's throw UCLA and Purdue in as well. Those are home games, but that's your next 6 games. 5 games, excuse me. That's your – no, wait.
You're right.
1,
next 6.
2, 3 – no, that's the next 5. Wait. Yeah, next 6. Okay, I'm sorry. So that's the next 6 games. That's as difficult a stretch of 6 games as anybody will face this year. The 3 of those are on the road, all to high-level teams. Then the 3 home games, none of them is a break. So what if they went 4-2? I'm not saying that I expect that to happen. If you said, okay, which one is likely to happen, I'd say it's likely that they might go 1-5 or 2-4. But until things happen, you can't say for sure what's going to happen. That's why we play the games. But to date, I mean, I have not had them. I have seen them in other brackets. I think Lenardi has them among his first 4 out, if I'm not mistaken. I've seen other brackets that have them in that range. I have not had them for a while in either the first 4 out or the next 4 out.
So you're saying all they need to do is just completely change who they are, and then they'll be good.
Yeah, and that's not unprecedented.
Sure.
It has happened. I remember, I always use this example because it's a perfect one. Washington in 2004 was 95th, and what we then had the RPI. I think they were like 95th or 92nd in the RPI. And then they won like every single game for the rest of the season, including beating an undefeated, literally undefeated, not league undefeated, literally undefeated final day of the regular season Stanford team at home, and went all the way up to like 45th or whatever. I mean, they completely changed who they were that year. Now, I look at the Indiana team, and they've got good enough players that you say, if it happened, it wouldn't be absurd. It's not like we're asking a bunch of JV guys to go out and win those games. So it's not impossible, but it would be a near complete reversal from what they've established as what they're likely to do.
Mike DeCourcy is our guest. He's on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Mike, from things you're hearing, if anything, for that matter, in your opinion, the next 6 games, we'll use that number for Indiana. Do you believe it's possible that the direction or the result of those 6 games could be the factor in terms of the future of Mike Woodson?
Well, that's certainly the media push. The outside push would be if it were to not go well, if they were to not at least break even in that stretch. I mean, remember, breaking even in that stretch gets you back in my field. At that point, you're in my field if you did that, and it doesn't matter which of the 3 they get. Which 3 of the 6 they get. If you do that, you're back in the field, and then you're relevant again. And then who knows what happens the rest of the way when you start playing Penn State and Washington, and you have Ohio State on your home court. At that point, who knows? So I do see that exterior pressure. But these decisions are made inside, sometimes by administration, often especially now, with the input of wealthy donors. And I don't know, I can't say what their perceptions are. And I haven't endeavored to learn. I'm a big believer in letting things play out. I detest college sports in-season firings. I think they're weak. I don't think they demonstrate any vision. We have to get in the market earlier. Look, if you know that that's where you're going, like if this were not to go well, these 6 games, you'd know by mid-February, late February, what you're going to do. You don't have to be officially open to make the calls you need to make. So I don't think there's anything worthwhile in that. That's why I'd say allow it to play itself out, see what they accomplish or don't accomplish, and then make your decision when it's time.
Mike, I'm curious of this. Within the fan base of Indiana, it's like a fait accompli to 99% of them that they need to move on from Mike Woodson. Okay, now that's the fan pulse, right? And the fan base at Indiana is extremely passionate. You could even go as far as to say rabid at times. Does that demerit Indiana in terms of the desired nature of it as a job for other coaches?
No, I don't believe it does.
Do you think it's
Kentucky,
a fair statement from fans or a fair sentiment from fans at this point?
Well, I mean, I think I understand that I would understand saying this season isn't what it ought to be or could have been. I understand that. I understand that if it were not to go well from now until March 8th, you would be back-to-back no tournaments. You would be now in the course of the last, and this is not on Mike's watch, but in the course of the last decade or so, you would have been more out than in. And so I can understand that you feel that if indeed it goes that way, then I can understand why you would feel that way. I like I said, but I'm not a believer in this can't happen. I mean, like for instance, yesterday, okay, Kentucky goes to Tennessee, already down, somewhat diminished by an injury or illness to their key power forward Andrew Carr, and I think he played last night, but I'm not sure how much of a difference he made. And they were already absent their backup point guard Kirk Kriisa, who hasn't played in 6 weeks, and then Lamont Butler, who I had as an All-American point guard, a second-team All-American a week ago, misses the game. And I'm thinking, they're going to Tennessee with no point guard? Like, how are they going to win that game? And they end up finding a way. They put their center at point guard, basically, and Tennessee wasn't ready for it, and it completely jumbled things up, and Kentucky wins on Tennessee's court. So that's why I don't believe in, well, it can't happen. Because, like, if you had a roster that was insufficient, and then you were facing these 6 games where you had no players that could score, no players that could defend or whatever, and you're playing these 6 games and you say, that's not going to happen. I get that, but you've got good players, and they have played well at times. They have not played consistently well over the course of any stretch of time, but they have played well in specific games. So the idea of them playing well enough in half or more of these games to get 3 to 4 victories in this stretch, it's not inconceivable. So I don't believe in making up one's mind until those results are in.
Mike, what do you think Matt Painter has done this year to adjust to life without Zach Edey and find balance in terms of his offense and just kind of maintaining the same high level that – I mean, they have good players, don't get me wrong. But what has jumped out, if anything, to you about Matt Painter's coaching job this season?
Well, I think one of the things that's jumped out to me is that the 2 players that I thought would take them from what they were to what they can be in the future, or what they could have been in the future, have not had great years. Miles Colvin has had great moments. Cam Heide has had great moments, but neither of them has been game-to-game consistently a source of offense. or maybe even a defensive game changer. They have each had terrific games. I mean, you don't beat Ole Miss without Miles Colvin, for instance. But they haven't become every game, every day contributors, and yet they still are getting this done. Well, how are they doing it? I mean, I think this is just amazing what they're able to accomplish. Now, they've got maybe the best point guard in college basketball in Braden Smith, and that helps a ton. But and Trey Coppin-Wren has become a double-double machine, even though he's not like Zach Edey, 7'4". He has a great will and a great dexterity on one or two post moves. He's not a low post magician, but when he commits to a move, he's very physically powerful and he's very quick with it, and he's excellent at finishing once he gets into the move. And so he's able to produce. But what they've been able to do with sort of patching around the rotation and what are they doing at power forward now and who are they bringing off the bench on the wings at what point? What they've been able to do to be this relevant and this significant without that development that I anticipated, and I would have suspected others anticipated that as well. I think that's just remarkable. And look, I'm not going to say this is Matt's best coaching job. I hate that cliche. But he's doing another amazing coaching job. And the reason he's doing it is because he's an amazing coach.
Mike DeCourcy is our guest, covers all things college basketball for Fox Sports and the Big Ten Network, resident bracketologist over there. Mike, for Michigan State, we talked about this a little bit earlier, and then before we had you on as well, they project to be a top 3 or top 4 seed right now where most things stand. I know you mentioned there's still a lot of basketball to be played, nothing set in stone right now, but it was brought up by our producer, Eddie Garrison, that they really have it's going to hit the fan type of stretch now with Big Ten Conference play upcoming. How much movement are you expecting for the Spartans with talk about a coach that's an all-timer in consistency, what Tom Izzo has been able to do yet again with this group with everything in front of them with 2 months to play?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because what they have done is really, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's unprecedented, but it's an anomaly in today's game where they're playing 10 guys. And it's almost like they don't – another thing that I've always – a term that's always kind of gotten under my skin a little bit is substitution patterns. And some coaches do substitute in patterns, but not all do. And Tom isn't doing that at all. I mean, it all comes down to, okay, what's the best matchup against this team on this night and who's feeling it and who's not. And that guy gets minutes. And do the two small point guards work against this team when they put Jeremy Fears out there with Jace Richardson? If it does, he'll do it. If it's not, he'll play Jace in place of Jeremy at times, but Jeremy will be out there most of the time. He plays multiple bigs. He has 4 bigs that he rotates. And again, it all comes down to, is Xavier Booker great that night? The other night he was, so he played a bunch. Some nights he maybe isn't the perfect matchup for that team, and he plays a little less, and Chris Cooper might play a little more. And he's done this all the way through. And so it is a difficult stretch, but it's not what Indiana's facing. I mean, they have to go to UCLA, then they have a couple of home games. They have to go to Illinois. They got to play Purdue and at Michigan and Maryland. And so it's really hard, but they're also better equipped for it. And I think that they're going to take losses in there. They're not going to get through that stretch undefeated or close to undefeated. But I don't know that the winner of this league is going to have many more than 4 losses.
Mike,
and 16-4 is a pretty good record.
It ultimately doesn't matter to the conferences unless it's one of their schools that are hoisting the trophy at the end of the tournament in April. But a lot of chest puffing by the SEC out of the gate for the season. Do you still view them as the top conference or one of the top conferences in college basketball this year?
Yeah, and I think the chest puffing matters from this standpoint. The more teams you get in, the more money you make.
Sure.
And the more you can puff your chest out about, you come here, you get in the show. And so it does matter from that standpoint. And I think it's going to be interesting because often in the past, when the Big Ten has been the league that's been getting these numbers, or maybe not quite 13, no one's ever gotten to there, but Big Ten's been getting 8, 9. They would have had 10 in 2020 if we'd had a tournament. So I I think that when that was happening and they weren't winning the championship, it was always, but you're not winning the championship. So if the SEC shatters every record, and they're on pace to the most teams in the tournament, the greatest percentage of your teams that you have in your league into the tournament, that they can get that one if they get to 13. The most top 4 seeds, they're on pace to get that as well. They'll shatter every significant record, and then you can break more as you advance. We'll see. But if they do that and then they don't have the champion, I don't think anybody's going to sit back and say, you had 13 teams in the tournament, but you weren't the best league. Of course they're the best league this year. A couple of years ago it was the Big Ten. Last year it was the Big 12. But right now the SEC has done an amazing job in non-conference, and once you're in your league, every night is a competition.
Mike, lastly, a couple of weeks ago, I'm sitting around, the doldrums of winter, right? I mean, you're looking for anything to like put on as a benchmark on the calendar to like get you out of the house, right? So I say to Shannon, I go, let's just put 5 cities in basically a hopper and pull one of them out and go for a weekend. Let's just we're just going to pick a city and go for a weekend and go see the museums, find a microbrew place, whatever. Morgantown, West Virginia, Chattanooga, Tennessee, Grand Rapids, Michigan, Knoxville, Tennessee, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the cities that we threw into a hat. We pulled out Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Now, we have not yet done the trip, but I'm assuming that we are in for a good weekend, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Now, when this is a winter trip? Is that what you're saying?
No, probably spring, probably late spring.
Okay. Well, this is a great city in the spring, without a doubt. Dine up on Mount Washington for sure. There are some wonderful restaurants up there, the Monterey Bay Fish Grotto, Lamont. Dine up there to get the great view. It's a breathtaking view. If you like baseball and the season's going, and it should be by then.
Great park, right?
There's no better ballpark than PNC Park. It's just a great place to watch a baseball game. The downtown area is pleasant. There's some good hotels. It's a really cool place. And then there are the various neighborhoods around the city that are fun to go to. Lawrenceville, where my wife grew up when it was just a working class sort of bedroom community. Now it's like the hoppingest, hippest place in town. Pretty amazing transformation there with lots of cool restaurants.
So what are we looking at? 5.5 hour drive? Is that about right?
It depends on how fast you drive. My wife and I, being how old we are, we had to build in those bathroom breaks and all that. So we usually took 6, but you can get there in 5.5 if you're determined. I'm
aggressive. I will say that. I'm aggressive. Mike, we appreciate it as always. I know you're very busy, so I appreciate the time.
Well, Jake, if you come, make sure that you give us a buzz so we can take you for a drink or something.
Oh, I'd love it, man. I absolutely would love it. I will definitely let you know because we got it down. Haven't picked the weekend yet, but I think it's probably I'd like to do it when the Pirates are playing because I think that would be very cool. So, would love to do it. Absolutely. Appreciate it, Mike.
Well, you take care.
All right, Mike DeCourcy on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Chattanooga, I'm a big fan of as well, which I've said before. It's kind of. You ever been to Morgantown, West Virginia?
I've not.
Morgantown, West Virginia is great because the University of West Virginia, or West Virginia University, I guess they call it, is there, and it's very cool. It's real hilly and everything else. I've only been there once. They have a Don Knotts statue because Don Knotts is from Morgantown. And when I looked up, I'm like, I wonder what else there is to do. So I look up things to do at West Virginia, Morgantown, West Virginia. First thing that caught Don Knotts statue.
We did that.
So I guess if the football team's not in town and the basketball team ain't playing, there's bars and hills, and that's about it. standing, when Jimmy came up with his idea about the movie party, so I'm told that it is possible for a big theater, yes, in fact, they can do a Blu-ray or DVD that hooks into the projector, but it depends on whether or not they're having to cancel any showings.
Sure.
As to the cost. Now, somebody else told me that in Frankfurt, that they have a theater there that play. Do you say theater or theater?
Theater.
Say it again.
Theater.
So you
Movie theater.
theater.
Yes.
Does it sound like I'm dropping the A when I say theater?
No, I think you're saying it the same way I am. Unless you
Yeah.
go theater,
Is the
then we
is
have
the A
an issue.
is
I
it
was about to say that's how I say it. I
is
say
the
movie
EA
theater.
is the EA the EA in the word, is it supposed to be just E or is it EA? Is it theater or is it just theater?
theater?
Go to the theater.
The first one. The first one.
So the A
Unless
is
you're drinking
basically
chai
it's a
tea.
I'm
silent
drinking my chai
it's a
tea.
silent A. It
Yeah,
just
yeah.
makes it a
Yeah.
okay. At any rate,
The cinema, let's just be done with it.
that's right. The Art Craft Theater in Franklin has shown Shawshank in the past. Check them out. They run it every now and again. Okay.
Are they DVS?
But I'd kind of like for this to be, here's the thing. Even though it'd be fun to do it in a group setting as such, there is part of me that wants to watch it just the three of us sitting, just three guys hanging out, checking out a flick, eating some popcorn, drinking a PBR. I want to see if you guys well up.
Jake, how long is the movie?
2.5.
Okay, Jimmy. So what he really wants to do is be able to stop it after every scene to tell us,
I don't
hey,
think
so this
Jake's one of those
this happened
people.
there.
I don't
I'm not
think Jake's
that guy.
one of those guys.
I'm totally
I
not
was
that
about to say
guy.
he's not that guy, but he would make it that guy for this movie.
However, after the theater or home theater viewing of it, my cousin's got one of those home theaters with, like, you know what I mean, the whole deal.
Yeah.
Maybe we do it there. Maybe I rent out his basement.
There you go.
You know, hey, Doug, I realize you're taking me to Manchester, England to go see Oasis, but can I also borrow your basement while we're at it? After the fact, though, then we can do the field trip. Now, this I would be willing to. I'm down with taking listeners. And I've mentioned before, the Mid-Ohio Sports Car Course is in Lexington, Ohio, which is so IndyCar races at the Lexington Mid-Ohio Sports Car Course, Steams Corners, Ohio, technically speaking, which is just outside of Mansfield, Ohio, halfway between a third of the way between Columbus and Cleveland, up 71. One of the first years we went there, I'm eating lunch, and I just get talking to a guy, and I said, you know, this really is kind of a remote area. I mean, you're 45-ish minutes from Columbus and 2 hours from Cleveland. And so I say to him, what's the employer in town? He says, well, it used to be the prison. Excuse me? It used to be the prison. Oh, there's a prison around? Well, it's gone now. It's closed, but it's still there, but it's closed. But you would know of it. It's Shawshank. And he said, no. Shawshank was in Maine. And he said, yeah, the movie was fictionally in Maine, but the entire film was filmed in Mansfield, Ohio, at the Ohio Boys Reformatory Prison. And I said, how far is that from here? It's like 15 minutes. Check, please. So I leave, and I come down over the hill, and it's like, oh, my gosh. And it is, I mean, I'm like, that's Shawshank, all right. And it was closed. And there was a guy locking up, and I pulled up, and, you know, as my life always happens to be, and I'm just like, hey, I heard about this, whatever. And he says, yeah, okay, I'll take you in. Well, since then they have, and that was probably, it had to have been 15, 18 years ago. And I went back to the racetrack the next day, and I'm telling everybody about this serendipitous find. And of all people, Tony George was totally fascinated by it. And Tony George is like, I want to go. And the guy had told me that they were trying to renovate it into a museum. And so I'm thinking, well, this might be a big windfall for him, right? Tony George gets impressed. But so Tony George went the next day, and he walked through. The guy took him through it. And then they ended up doing a series of fundraisers over a number of years. And anyway, the prison now is essentially a museum to the film. And when you go in it, it has, in each room, it has still photos from the movie.
Wow.
Of this happened here, that happened there. But literally the entire movie was filmed in Mansfield, Ohio. So after we do our viewing party, which is probably never going to happen, but we keep talking about it and it's fun, then we'll take a little field trip. We'll load in the Jeep, no puking in the Jeep, please, and we'll drive. We'll do an afternoon drive, and that one.
How far is the drive?
3.
Okay.
Shotgun.
So if we left it 10,
Well
we
played.
get there at 1, and then we could, get Applebee's in Mansfield and then head back.
Club
Like club?
Applebee's or
Club
regular
Applebee's, that's right. That's Club Applebee's. That's correct. Pacers in action tonight, by the way. 7 o'clock tip, Fieldhouse taking on the Detroit Pistons. And, Jimmy, I think you seem to be a little bit intrigued by you heard Rick Carlisle talking about it there in the promo with Kevin and Andy, just how they bounce back, right? And how fresh the legs feel.
Yeah, I mean, I observed this before they made the trip to Paris. This is tied for the longest layoff that they've had all season, and it didn't bother them the last time this happened. Granted, that was just a regular season 4-day lull in the calendar, whereas this is a cross-country journey, a lot of emotions, time, and ruining routine that you had set up by making this great trip. And by all accounts, it was an unforgettable experience for all involved. They had a great time. They split, so it winds up being totally worthwhile for them. But this is a critical juncture before the All-Star break. They have 8 games left before the NBA world descends on San Francisco for the 2025 All-Star game, and that stretch of play for them includes, of those 8 games, 5 of them are away from Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Now, they've largely ironed out all of those road woes that plagued them out of the gate. They've gotten healthier. You've seen a continuing matchup in the fold for Thomas Bryant with where he fits in for that front court depth. You're getting Neesmith and Nembhard rounding back into form. There's still room for improvement there, but they're getting their sea legs underneath them. And you have your consistency with your franchise pillars of Tyrese Halliburton, of Pascal Siakam, of Miles Turner, and the growth of Benedict Mathurin. So there's a lot of reason for still belief and upside for the Pacers, and why I get internally that when the trade deadline happens a week from tomorrow, they'll probably stand pat in terms of major moves because they want to see this roster through, and they believe their best playing days of the season are ahead of them. But a lot of that, Jake, as I brought up earlier, comes back to setting a solid foundation for this dead sprint from February to April into the playoffs, and not having a lull after the Paris trip of a 3-5 stretch over these final 8 games.
Doesn't it feel like if they were to trade Turner, and I personally don't think that's going to happen. I'm not saying it won't, but doesn't it feel like that would be honestly just kind of a complete start over? Because he's such an integral part of how they play.
It would all depend on what comes back, but it is undoubtedly, and Eddie brought this up, and he is correct, it is undoubtedly acknowledging this is not a year where you compete for a Larry O'Brien trophy. If you trade Tyrese Halliburton, you are saying we believe in still our core that we have, and we're going to get assets back for Turner that would help us have a quick turnaround to change what we do as an organization, but we don't see it this year. So I don't think it's a long-term blow-up, but it's certainly looking at what is in the East right now and telling yourself, we're not paying Turner. That this is that scenario. I'm not saying they're not going to, but this is what you would tell yourself if you're a Pacers exec, if you're Chad Buchanan or Kevin Pritchard. We're not paying Turner this offseason. We're not good enough this year to win the Larry O'Brien trophy or get to the finals, but Turner's a valuable commodity.
Man.
Let's punt on this year and see what we can get for. They'll still be a playoff team, but let's punt on contention this year and bring assets back.
He feels to me, though, to be the kind of player where if you were to and I get it. I mean, if you know that if Miles Turner privately tells him, if he pulls a Paul George and goes, look, I don't want to be here. I get it. You got to recoup something, right? Instead of just letting him walk.
Well, that's what Fox did to Sacramento, right? He told them just now, hey, listen, I'm not re-signing.
I don't think Turner's going to do that.
I don't either.
But if they move from him, there are some players that you move on from and you say, yeah, we'll get something back in return. Typically in this situation, player has leverage, right? So you're hoping to get back 70% of what you send out, 80% maybe. You know when you traded Paul George, you remember when you traded Paul George, it's like, yeah, they got Oladipo. Oh, okay, well, that's cool. Like, IU guy, that's awesome. And that Sabonis dude. Oh, Arvydas Sabonis' kid? Like, he was a young guy when he came out of Gonzaga, right? Yeah, okay. And they blossomed before. But at the time that they got them, it was probably 80% return on what you knew was a known commodity in Paul George. And so, therefore, and probably the same even in trading Sabonis. I mean, Halliburton was thought to be going to be a really good player, but you didn't know necessarily. All of a sudden, it just happened. You're like, oh, my gosh, what a coup. But if they were to trade him, though, Jimmy, it feels like they are basically saying we are going to go ahead and set ourselves back another 2 years or 3 because whatever they would have to get to replace him, you've got to go through that entire process.
I'll push back against that. I don't think it takes them 2 to 3 years to fix it. I trust Kevin Pritchard and Chad Buchanan enough with the creativity. You might be right, Jake.
From personnel, you might be right, but I'm just saying stylistically because I think what he does is he allows them to play in such a way that if you don't have him there, then your playing style and your defensive style, I think, radically change, and it takes a long time to get back that same cohesiveness.
Yeah, he's a unique player in that, and you've brought this up a couple times, maybe he's worth more to the Pacers than he is anybody else because he's a perfect fit for Rick Carlisle's system and what he wants out of them, both offensively and defensively. I would just push back on the idea that if you were to acquire pieces that force Buchanan and Pritchard to think on their feet to reinvent that lineup without Turner, they have shown enough for me over the last half decade that they can do it in a quick amount of time. The other aspect of it, though, and this is really the key to my entire belief of where the Pacers are right now, and I'm going to say this until they put pen to paper with Miles Turner in the offseason, assuming they bring him back. The way they are so strong right now against the cap, you can feel it because you're like, oh, well, maybe they make an upgrade here, or maybe they could find a new sixth man or another front court piece. Well, no, they have to jump through 5 or 6 hoops just to be able to get Thomas Bryant for a bag of chips, who was a great acquisition for them. If come this time next offseason, your top 3 percentage cap players are Siakam, Halliburton, and Turner, it's the same headaches you're having right now to try to make roster acquisition, to fine-tune that roster. And also, it's probably the 4th best, maybe 5th best roster of contenders in the Eastern Conference alone. And that's the rock and a hard place to have right now. I love Miles Turner. I think he's an exceptional player. I think he's going to make $30 to $35 million somewhere next season. I don't think the Pacers can pay it, but Eddie brought up this point yesterday. The reality is, do you move him now for assets, accepting the fact that you are telling the locker room we're not good enough to win it this year, or do you play through this season and then evaluate sign and trade options or the risk of letting him walk in free agency? That's the reality of where they're at.
Hey, Jake, what if the free agency money instead allows them to get a complete wing player? If you let Turner, okay, yeah, but the problem is there. Everybody wants that player.
Yeah.
Right?
The other thing to note is I don't think you're going to get the return on Turner that you would expect because no team can negotiate with him. You can't negotiate with him until the offseason starts. So why would I trade for a player
not knowing whether or not you're going to retain him?
That I have no for sure certainty on being able to retain.
That's where you do a sign and trade, right?
And
in the offseason, yes.
But there have been, and I'm going to go with the always in the Turner mix cliches here, there have been suitors, and I don't know how the financials work, but the Lakers have been obsessed with Miles Turner for the last 5 years.
That's true. He does always seem to be linked to them, right?
And I don't know what assets, like they always have their draft chests, drained at this point in time with where they're at. I don't know if they have anything, but it is a fair point, Eddie. I still think, though, he is a talented enough player where if, like, the Lakers are always going to be a perfect fit because they need another big. I don't think they have the financials to do it. But if you're a team that says, we need one more big or one more player that can stretch the floor because this is our year and we're that piece away, you could get solid value for Turner. But you are correct, Eddie. It is capped because of the fact that he can't negotiate with anybody until the offseason.
Do you have plays of the day?
I do.
You had to think about that.
I was thinking about bird rights for a second, then I realized those don't come into play until the sign and trade conversation. But yes, I do have some plays.
Okay, well, we will do Jimmy's wildly popular and still available to be re-sponsored plays of the day next.
Today's plays of the day, a mix of basketball as well as some Champions League. Let's go across the pond. We'll start first with Champions League play. Match day 8 of 8. A lot of teams need to win to be able to get to the knockout rounds. We'll start first with PSG, Paris Saint-Germain over Stuttgart. We'll take PSG to win on the money line in that one. That's at plus 40 juice, by the way. Another one, this is rare. I don't combine these very often. Manchester City has to win today to be able to move on to the knockout rounds, but they're heavily favored. So to get the odds down a little bit, we're going to do a rare parlay. Going to take Manchester City to win on the money line.
Isn't that your team?
It is. And Erling Haaland as an anytime goal scorer. That's going to get you down to about minus 145. Admittedly, more expensive juice than Eddie regularly likes to play. But again, it's a win or you're out type of moment for Man City. So take them in a parlay. I'm going to lay the 7 for the Pacers tonight against the Pistons at home. Last one for you, Alabama 3-0 on the road in SEC play. I expect it to improve to 4-0 tonight. Give me the Tide on the money line over the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Eddie, any bets for you?
Yes, Jalen Duren double-double tonight against the Indiana Pacers. Their improved defense is because they are not going after offensive rebounds. The offensive rebounding rate for Indiana has dropped from 14th to 29th during this improved stretch of defensive play. And Jalen Duren has played the Pacers, I want to say 9 times. The only time,
9?
Yes. The only time he has failed to record a double-double against the Pacers was the first time he faced them. So I expect that streak to continue tonight.
Eddie Garrison riding a trend. Those are your plays of the day.
So you're betting on the team you love, is that right?
I am, that's correct.
You're betting for them or against them?
Betting for them.
That's like the dumbest thing one can do, right? Doesn't that
Well,
break
I
like every
mean,
rule?
look, they...
Were you here for when I said I bet against my Seattle Kraken?
You told me that off air. I don't
Okay.
remember if I was here when you said it on air. Look,
Seattle.
I'm all for...
Eddie's been a diehard for 2 years.
I'm all for an emotional hedge. But look, Manchester City's one of the top clubs in the world, and the idea of them not being in the Champions League knockout rounds is almost unfathomable. I think they get it done today, and Erling Haaland is leading the Premier League in goal scorers. He's one of the best goal scorers in the world. I think you can combine those two and pretty comfortably walk out of there with a nice little bit of addition to your bankroll.
I'd like to know this. Now, I'm going to – okay.
Thank you.
If I have a number before me that is – I have a list before me in college basketball that features 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 teams. Eddie, of the 12 teams I have before me, how many do you believe Jimmy can get correct when I give him the category of which he's picking these 12 teams?
8.
Over under of 8. I'm going to go 3. Over under of 3. It's a tough one. Jimmy, this is tough.
Okay.
So if you get – I'm putting you on the spot because I would not have gotten this.
Obviously, I have a lot of confidence in you, Jimmy.
There are
misplaced.
12 teams in college basketball that still remain undefeated within their conference.
Okay.
How many can you name?
Michigan State.
That's one.
Am I done once I get one wrong, or are we playing until I can't?
We got a couple minutes here.
Auburn?
Correct?
Drake?
No. You're close.
Still in the Valley?
No. But if you were writing it out, you're close. If you're sloppy, if your handwriting's sloppy, people might think you were correct.
We talked about one of these schools
Marquette?
during the show.
Marquette is not one.
No.
We talked about a lot of schools during the show today, in my defense. So I'm at 2 right now.
We mentioned 2.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think we mentioned this. Oh, yeah, you did mention the school.
Duke?
Okay. Ding.
Duke is correct, yep.
Mm.
Now, one of
Houston?
them, Houston is correct.
Bingo.
They had a
So you
thriller
hit my
against
over.
Kansas.
Now, the rest of them, I don't think you're going to get.
Bryant.
Would
they're
not have
that's
pulled that.
really big heating and cooling school. Now, I don't understand this. Yale is 4-0 in the Ivy League.
Nice.
4 games in the Ivy League. Yes. I mean, it's,
Is it a tight race in the Ivy League? I always like
It
to pull
is,
that
Mac
every year.
school.
What's
You
that?
want to let him try to see if he can figure out the Mac school that's undefeated?
Miami of Ohio.
No, good guess, though.
Good, same state.
Ohio? Bobcats?
No. When I was a kid, I used to wear shoes from Stride Right called Zips.
Akron.
Correct. Okay, this one I think is a new. Do they have a new mascot? And they used to be a state, McNeese. It's now the McNeese Cowboys. I thought it was McNeese State.
They dropped the state?
I guess.
They pulled a Memphis.
Have they always been the Cowboys?
I thought they were something else too.
I thought it was an HBCU. Not that they can't be Cowboys, but like I was thinking it was like an animal mascot.
It's still McNeese State.
It is?
Mm-hmm.
Have they always been the Cowboys?
They always been the Cowboys? Can you look that up? Southern University, by the way, Omaha.
Wouldn't have gotten that.
Peyton Manning's favorite team. St. Mary's, our buddy
Maybe
Randy
would've
Bennett,
gotten
friend of
there.
the show, and the place where my cousin was a 2-time all-conference softball player at Utah Valley.
Mm.
Those are the undefeateds left.
In
John
conference play.
What's that?
In conference play.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. John is at Tom's watch party, by the way. He will be there until 6. Pacers in action tonight at the Fieldhouse till 7. Eddie, what do we have lined up on the big program for tomorrow?
Tony East will join us tomorrow and working on some other things for the show as well.
Working on some other things.
Yeah.
Okay. Nothing wrong with that.
Eddie
right?
never stops.
A lot of times we just, you know what? We just plug and play, right? Let's just go. A day like today, windows down, nice weather. James is here. That means John's up next. He's at Tom's watch party. We're going to throw it right across the street because Tom's is right down on Illinois Street in the old Ram location. So you have plenty of time if you were in the area to stop by, have a cold beverage. Diet Coke's perfectly sufficient. Listen to John, and we will join you again tomorrow at noon. We thank you